Okay, good. The November 9th, 2020 Board of Education regular workshop meeting will now come to order. Mrs. Milk, please call the roll.
Mr. Estes?
Here.
Mrs. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Lobach?
Here.
Dr. Bruno?
Here. Mr. Guzman, Mr. Curry, and Ms. Buttimer notified the superintendent that they would not be able to be in attendance at tonight's meeting. May I have a motion to allow Mr. Guzman, Mr. Curry, and Ms. Buttimer to participate by phone for tonight's meeting? I need a second, please.
Second, sorry.
Very good. Any discussion? Very good. Roll call.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Lobach?
Yes.
Mr. Estes?
Yes.
Dr. Bruno?
Yes. And one more time. Mrs. Moak, roll call, please.
Mrs. Buttimer?
Here.
Mr. Estes?
Here.
Mr. Guzman?
Here.
Mrs. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Lobach?
Here.
Mr. Curry?
Here.
Dr. Bruno?
Here. Thank you very much. Mr. Lubbock, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members of the public who wish to address the board should check in with Mrs. Moak, the board recording secretary. Speakers are asked to maintain respectful decorum and limit comments to 3 minutes or less. Mrs. Moak, is there anyone who would like to make public comment? No. Thank you very much. And we have on the agenda a celebration, which Melissa will facilitate. So very good.
Absolutely. Well, it feels good to have something to celebrate again. And so I am going to turn it over to Dr. McCluskey to introduce our performers and give you a little bit of context on what you're going to see tonight and how this all came about.
And just before we get started, Mike, is our other family, the Anderson family, with us or not yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Well, I have to say that I'm super, super excited to be sharing this information with everyone. Mrs. Fearborn and Mrs. Presley and I, all the way back to last spring, were racking our heads around how are we ever going to teach band and orchestra in a remote setting to students who are in 5th grade and have never been able to participate in band and orchestra before. And so we talked endlessly about different strategies, different supports, what is this going to look like? And about 2 weeks ago, both Elle and Rita sent me videos that did nothing but put a huge smile on my face because of the perseverance that our students have even in the face of remote learning in band and orchestra. We have a special video to share with everybody so that you can see their hard work and dedication to band and orchestra. So Mike, can you play the video, please?
Hi, I'm Anna Beckham. We're going to be playing page 20, measure 61, line 4. So let's go. Feet flat, edge of church, all back turn, arm button, hold the upper bow. Up, out, in. Okay.
have our students here with us with their families if the board has any questions. We also have Elle and Rita, our band and orchestra teachers, with us as well, if anybody would like to ask them any questions.
Hey, I just want to say, I'm glad to get my hot cross buns fixed. And I am 100% not joking. As a former band member, the hot cross buns concert from 5th grade is always my favorite concert that kids do. Always, hands down, 100%. Don't care what you show me later in life. Hot cross buns is the best. Love it.
Fantastic. Well, perhaps we can have as a regular practice.
Hot cross buns?
Well, we could, but maybe different music. There might be some other selections of our two artists. What are their favorite pieces they'd like to offer up? Do they have favorite pieces?
That sounded pretty
My
good.
favorite. Oh, sorry.
Anna or Brennan, do you have a favorite piece that you're playing right now?
My favorite is Jingle Bells.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, Jingle Bells.
Jingle bells. Okay.
I like Hot Cross Buns and all the songs that we were learning.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, please keep playing. We look someday to see you on the stage, the big lights.
And I'll tell you why I like hot cross buns the best, because it shows it goes from not knowing how to play an instrument to going to learning how to play a song. And it's that first step from not knowing how to play it to a song that it's the best. So good job.
And
We
doing it
enjoyed
remotely,
getting
Mr.
acquainted with
Lobach.
hot cross buns.
I'm sorry?
We've enjoyed getting acquainted with hot cross buns.
It's the best.
A lot of practice here. And so very proud of Anna, and also thankful for her teachers who have put in a lot of passion and hard work into having that come across in remote learning. And so thank you to all the teaching staff and orchestra, and really throughout Ben Franklin, where Anna goes to school. We really appreciate all the hard work everyone's putting in. So thanks so much.
I think Rita and I have been really impressed with how amazing the students have done and how well they've adapted to all of their learning remotely, but especially having to learn an instrument for the first time, and just that the unique challenges that brings, because it's a very hands-on thing. Rita and I are very used to being in very close contact with our students. So they've been so independent and so resourceful, and their parents have been extra helpful. And it's just been such a relief to see that they're getting a really wonderful experience, even though we can't be together in person. And I'm just amazed by them. So I'm so glad that they're having a great experience this year.
Yeah, I have to second what Elle says. I can't even begin to tell you how impressed I am with all the kids and what they've done. It truly is amazing. And that's really an understatement, because they're practicing, they're taking all our suggestions and applying them, remotely. Kudos to the kids, really. They're just, they just put a smile on my face all the time. And Elle, I know we're always smiling about
absolutely.
Them, so.
And it takes a lot of courage to do what they're doing, because normally in the beginning music setting, they're together in a group and they play together a lot at the beginning. So to do so much individual playing over a computer screen in front of their peers, and they're supportive of one another, and they're brave, and they follow all of our instructions. So it's just been amazing to see their progress, and we couldn't be more proud.
Wonderful.
Will they come back? Will you come back in April or May?
I think we can make that happen.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh, sure.
I know we were all super excited, and I was thrilled when they sent me the videos, just to see all of the students' hard work. And like I said, being able to do it remotely is super impressive. So
And
nice
thank you,
job.
Dr. McCluskey, for supporting us through this journey too, and helping us plan and make it happen. Because like you said, we were a little bit deer in the headlights staring this down.
We were,
Yes.
but truly the students are shining through it. So nice job.
Well, thank you to all of the teachers, the kids, our artists and their parents. Somehow the beauty and wonder of music just comes through under any and all circumstances. So thank you so much for bringing a little joy to us this evening.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before I ask Melissa to address another recognition, I just want to let folks know who are looking at the Zoom that I am here. I haven't moved, but my video camera has decided not to work, at least for a while. We'll see if we can get that back on, but that is why you're not seeing me. You're only hearing me.
Nice change.
Okay, but maybe that's a good thing. We'll take a poll afterwards. All right, Melissa, you're on again.
Thank you. Well, hopefully our kids will come back in April or May and we can hear how they end the year and how far their skills have come. So I want to thank Abby and Ashlyn, last year's student board members, for joining us again tonight. We have another piece of celebration, and so I'm going to show this. This is for the board. So in the spirit of celebration, it gives me great pleasure to present this next award to the board for achieving governance recognition. On behalf of the Illinois Association of School Boards, congratulations to the following school boards who have engaged in activities that lead to excellence in local school governance, supporting quality public education. This year's recipients were Glen Ellyn District 41, Bloomingdale District 13, Des Plaines 62, Fremont 79, Grays Lake 127, Indian Prairie 204, Lake Villa 41, Woodridge 68, Meridian 223, Paris Union 95, Prospect Heights 23, Round Lake 116, Arlington Heights 214, Washington District 50, and Wheaton Warrenville 200. So the board has a plaque that will go up at CSO, where all of the other board pictures are on display. And just again, want to congratulate and thank everybody for their service. You have envelopes with your recognition pins. And if you check your email after 9 o'clock tonight, you'll just have a little thank you in there on behalf of the district from everyone for your service.
Well, Melissa, thank you. That's
Thanks to Ted.
That's wonderful. And yes, we really, we owe a special thanks to Ted for putting that application together. But
Can you show the pen?
and that's the pen. But to all board members, I'm swapping out. Look at that. We got ourselves a new. There I am.
Whatever works.
To all board members, you should take a moment to acknowledge your hard work, to professionalize your work, to move the board in a very strong and affirmative direction. It's an achievement. It's something to be proud of. And I want to thank all of you for your effort and cooperation. And that explains why we have Ashlyn and Abby with us. Do they get a pin too?
We can check and see if they do. I believe they do. But before we're finished with this part, I promised Ashlyn and Abby that if they wanted to shamelessly make a comment to drum up interest for a new round of
Yes.
student board members, I will turn it over to them if they want to take a minute to say anything.
Please do.
I guess I'll just keep it short. I just wanted to say how amazing this opportunity has really been, and I strongly recommend, I mean, I don't know how many 8th graders are really watching this, but if there happen to be any 8th graders, to really seek this opportunity, because it's such a cool event to get to take on a leadership role and try and really make a difference in your community. So yeah.
Thank you, Abby.
I'll go next. I think it's a great opportunity to, exemplify leadership skills to your peers and to people around the district, and kind of showcase students' voices that in more like a personal way.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. I'm convinced that the State School Board Association was persuaded of our worthiness because of Abby and Ashlyn's contributions. You definitely were an X factor. And by the way, your pictures were included as in a board photo at the actual event in which the board was acknowledged for their recognition. So there you go. Yeah.
So mark that on your
Board members, any
college
thoughts?
applications.
What's that?
So remember to mark that in your college application.
Yes, put that on your college application. for
Absolutely.
sure. Well, again, thank you. Good work, Melissa. Thanks. And I look forward to the day we're back in the board room under normal operations where the plaque would be visible to all. Thank you. You sticking around, Abby and Ashlyn? You're going to spend the night with us? Probably not.
Yeah, it was good to see you all though. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Nice. Thank you, Melissa. Nice surprise. Thank you. All right, consent agenda. Are there any items board members would like to be removed from the consent agenda to be considered separately? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes meeting minutes of October 22nd, 2020, and the personnel report, which includes employment recommendations and resignations as presented?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Guzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Buttermer,
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Mr. Robach,
Yes.
Mrs. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Resties,
Yes.
Dr. Bruno.
Yes. And up next is the 2021 District 41 reopening school plans and our Pratt update. Melissa will facilitate this update.
Before we have our metrics group give the metrics update, I would like to thank our support to student, staff, and family subgroup. They've put together an amazing resource guide. Once it is finalized, we will make that available to all families on our website. So thank you to that subcommittee for doing their work behind the scenes, but it will absolutely benefit our families. I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Ellen to do the metrics update.
Very good.
And Mike, it'll be the other one. There you go.
Hey, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, so state of the metrics this week. This was put together today, November 9th. Next slide, Mike, please. Just a reminder for folks of the 5, what are we calling them, wheels, about what it takes to stay for in-person learning. So we like to put these up front so that everybody remembers that there's a lot of interconnected pieces. Next slide. So week 44, this is from October 25th to October 31st. And as we remind everybody, these metrics are about 10 days behind. And next slide. So, I mean, I think if anybody who's been watching the news, I think we all know that the numbers are pretty bad around, not just in DuPage County, but all over the state of Illinois. So that has not changed. If you can see, most of the state is in orange, which is the IDPH warning signs of increased COVID transmission. So next slide, there's us. Everyone around us is orange as well. And this is the actual IDPH data for DuPage County. So we are at 312 cases per 100,000 residents in DuPage County. And as I think if everybody goes back to the actual framework, we wanted to be under 100 cases. Deaths have increased as well. There were 16 deaths last week, or in week 44. But one of the other numbers that we really look at is the testing positivity, which is at 10.6%. Go to the next slide. This is the IDPH puts together school metrics specifically by counties. So again, it just shows that all of our benchmarks are insubstantial for week 44. Which is, again, not unique to our county right now. That's everywhere. Next slide. So, you know, as we've been talking this week, the guidance has changed. A lot of things have changed really since we first started doing this in August. The DuPage County Health Department had put out their framework for going back to school. And as things have evolved over the last couple of months, their guidance has also evolved over the last few months. So we put this in here just to make sure the board is alerted and the community is alerted that the DuPage County Health Department is not making any decisions about keeping schools open. They had put together their framework to help schools as a resource to make decisions, but they are leaving it up to each district to decide for themselves. I think part of that, and Melissa can talk a little bit more about that, is the continuing body of evidence about schools not being a transmission point, and having districts base their decisions on their own COVID outbreaks within their schools as opposed to within the county. Next slide. I'll let Katie take over.
So this was put out today by the county. You can see everything's substantial. Those are all numbers that were already included by IDPH. So next slide. And the following slides will go over local, county, and then regional trends that are a little bit more up to date. Next slide. And next slide. This is our D41 dashboard. So you can see the progression over the 3 weeks. Last updated on Friday. And the third set of numbers is just with, the 3rd through 8th graders only being in school for 3 days. So it'll be different this week too. Next slide. This is for our 5 towns that feed into D41. There's not any good news there. No. So we're at 13.61%. If you look at just Glen Ellyn, it's higher than that. I looked today. It's like 15 or something. So, yeah, next slide. And the next few slides are about schools in particular. This is on their influenza monitoring site, but now they have had to include COVID-like illness. So that yellow line is, the yellow line is COVID. So it's kind of going up now that more people have been in person. And it's 13.45 per 1,000 students and staff. That number, that since I've been watching it the last 3 weeks, has gone up quite a bit every week. So next slide. There are 2 new metrics added to the IDPH website this past week. It'll be updated every Friday, just like their metrics for schools and counties are. The first one is school age metrics and outbreaks. So to summarize this without reading it to you, basically an outbreak is considered 5 cases that have shared an exposure either on school or like in an after school activity of whom are not related to each other. And so anyway, so there's not that many, which is good news. You can skip to the next slide. And then, so this is for DuPage County. So there's actually only 7 outbreaks in the entire state. And in DuPage County, there's just 1 at this school.
Katie, can I, I'll share this in my report too. When we had our meeting today with DuPage County Health Department, they did share that they believe this is behind because they are aware that there are more outbreaks in DuPage than what.
Yes, this is just what has been fully investigated.
Yes.
Like contact traced, which at the way the metrics are right now, it's impossible to contact trace because.
Yeah, so they are absolutely certain that there are more outbreaks.
Yeah,
than
because
what's
there's,
reflected.
you'll see on the next slide. So this goes over exposures, and this is just, basically positive cases in schools. So you can skip to the next slide. And this is basically like a contact tracer has called someone who has a positive case, and they're like, where have you been? I've been to dance class and the grocery store and grandma's house and school, like if school's open. So anyone who's been any of those places. So none of our D41 schools were listed in here, but there are 76 schools in DuPage County that have potential exposures. And again, I believe it is very behind. Next slide. And then this just gives a visual of where we were the last time we talked to you a couple weeks ago. We were just predicting like we were gonna cross the 100, and now look where we are. Next slide. And then the test positivity has also done the same little climb up the mountain. Next slide. And number of deaths has definitely gone up, but it kind of is on a sawtooth pattern, which is a good thing. Next slide. This is the 7-day rolling average by age group. And so the 20 through 59-year-olds are
39, 20 through 39, still the biggest culprit.
right. And then including that yellow line is,
Oh, yeah.
40 to 59. They're pretty tight up there. So next slide. And then this is just the specific youth groups. So 0 to 4 is the blue line, 5 to 14 is the green line, and 15 to 19 is the red. And so you can see the ages that are in our school are rising just the same as everyone else in the community. Next slide. Next slide. So this is Region 8, which to review is DuPage and Kane County put together. And you can see for test positivity, there has been 65 days of positivity increase and well over the 8% threshold. And for hospital admissions, 55 days of hospital admissions and doing the same like straight up mountain climb. The hospital bed availability, 20% is the threshold. And so this is from yesterday, so we're almost there. Just about. And then ICU beds, I guess that's the good news is we have ICU beds because luckily not as many people are getting quite as sick as they did in the spring. So, next slide. And this is our test positivity as a region. So the latest that I have is through November 5th, and we are at 13.3%. And I think that's it. Any questions?
Well, thank you both, Ellen and Katie. Let me open it up to board members. Mike, can you take off the presentation so I can see people? Thank you very much. Okay, let me throw it open and see if there are questions for folks. Guillermo, any questions for either Ellen or Katie?
No, right now, Bob. Thanks. Thank you both.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Julie.
I guess I just have one, and I think I know the answer. Just want to confirm. Are we still, as far as the contact tracing is confirmed, if a student or I guess teacher is found positive, because our students are 6 feet apart, they wouldn't contact trace the other students in the classroom because of the 6 feet thing and mask wearing? Is that?
So I can tell you the process that's being used here is they are talking to the classroom staff and not just making that assumption. So when we have a positive or close contact, the nurses are working through, and so are the principals. Today, I know we were dealing with a situation related to the bus. So reviewing the seating chart, but then also going back and watching the bus videos to see if kids were really staying seated in the exact seat they were supposed to be in, or if they were leaning into the aisle that would have compromised the 6 feet. So it's kind of all of that, depending on where, what it is they're investigating. So we're not just making an assumption that because the classroom's set up that way, that doesn't mean anybody would have been up and moving around. So they start with the seating chart or the bus seating chart and then work their way by talking to staff.
Good, Julie? Yeah. Yeah, okay, very good. All right, let me go back online. Bruce, any questions for either Ellen or Katie?
No, I don't have any questions.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Estes, any questions for our? Thank you. Let me jump back online. Jessica, any questions for Ellen or Katie?
Yeah, so I think you noted that an outbreak now is defined as 5 cases with a transmission, but as of last week, it was just 2. So 1 giving it to person A giving it to person B. I guess, what's your understanding of the motivation behind that? And then when you couple that piece of information with the fact that, as you mentioned, contract tracing has become much more difficult, I guess, what are your thoughts around that?
I don't know the why. I think because there's just the level of the virus is so much higher in the community that it's hard to say with just 2 cases that it was definitely transmitted at school. So I think that they were, this is my interpretation, but I think by raising that bar to 5, that would give more indication that the transmission happened at school as opposed to somewhere else outside of school.
Yeah, I guess my sense is that the goalposts keep changing farther out, so that I guess I'm questioning at what point should the district be considering an adaptive pause, because I feel that's the goalpost that keeps changing, and so this is our beginning the 5th week of being in red, and this is as of Friday, it's the first time we've had every single metric we're following for schools be red. And then it was like, okay, well, we're still in school, but we're going to wait for an outbreak. And an outbreak is when you pass it from one to another. And now an outbreak is, well, now we got to wait till there's 5 people to call it an outbreak. And that's going to be when we're going to consider an adaptive pause until we get to that. And so these goalposts for me keep moving. And that gives me concern, because we're exceptionally far outside of my own personal comfort zone. So I guess, where do we see this headed, and when should the district be considering an adaptive pause?
We'll talk about that during my report, Jess.
Yeah.
And we're using 2 for an outbreak, even though IDPH has changed to 5, we're going to use 2
Okay.
in district, just because that's what we've shared with our parents, and to keep our hands around this a little bit closer.
Okay.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, from my perspective, I think the biggest problem is that the county health department is taking no responsibility in making and helping schools make those decisions. I think if anything, they have taken a step back, and please correct me if you disagree, Melissa, but the frameworks were put out in August with the intent that this is what all schools would use in Illinois to make these decisions. And then they definitely backed off from that. And then just at the end of October said that they're not going to tell any schools what to do. So you have to decide for yourself, which makes it harder for each district to really make those decisions.
Just to clarify, I think, part of that districts need to own, because, legally the county health department doesn't have the authority to tell us what to do. They can guide us. And I think some of us, I believe we all want to work closely with that guidance. I think because I think they want to allow, because every district has different circumstances, and I'll talk a little bit about the comments made today during our meeting. I think our county health department has been in there standing right with us. So I don't believe that it's because they've pulled back. I think legally they just don't have that authority. And so that's where that difference came in. And I think our county kind of operates a little bit differently than, from what I'm hearing, other counties and the level of support they get, we're supported to a much higher level.
Okay. Jess, did you have another question for Ellen or Katie?
Maybe, I don't know if this is an appropriate question, I'll ask it, and if it's not, just tell me. This is sort of piggybacking off of Julie's question. I feel like the emerging evidence is that, or it's not emerging, it's a fact now, that the coronavirus is aerosolized, and so it's kind of just in the air in a space, and we know that the guidance is 6 feet of distance as a mitigation, but that doesn't mean that it's, you know, not in the air everywhere in the room. So I guess, I don't know, I guess I'm wondering if we're headed towards guidance from the health department, if there's going to be updates at some point from them that factors this in. I feel like the guidance we have is from August, and not factoring in this aerosolized stuff.
So I'll answer that one. So they're never going to actually say that it's aerosolized because healthcare workers are not wearing N95s with COVID patients. So they're never going to say that for school children when healthcare workers have been working on the front line and only wearing the type of mask that I'm wearing right now with eye protection. So it's still they're always going to say that it's droplet just because our country doesn't have enough PPE for the people that are working on the front line. So you're never going to get anyone to ever say that it's actually aerosolized. There are aerosolized procedures when you're intubating a patient, is basically the only thing that's considered aerosolized at this time. You could say that you're aerosolizing when you're talking or coughing, but no one will ever stand behind that because that would be impossible to have enough masks for every healthcare worker that would need it. So if that makes sense.
I guess it does, but where does that leave us as a district if we're taking our guidance from a public health official that really can't say it's aerosolized because of a supply chain issue, when that factors into the fact that we have a classroom of 10 to 15 children.
I think most guidance will tell you that ventilation is one of the most important things besides wearing a mask, which becomes really important in the months that we're heading into. But again, I would say that there are aerosolized procedures, but everyone's wearing a mask. No one's, going into anyone else's face. So we would still be following droplet precautions, which is 6 feet apart, and assuming that most things are getting caught in your mask or falling to the ground if they get through your mask within the 6 foot distance. Somebody that's coughing should be out the door, so it's not going to happen in school unless somebody is sending their very, very sick coughing kid to school, and hopefully a teacher is sending them to the nurse and out the door as fast as possible.
Good. Thank you.
I gotcha. I think I understand that a little bit better. So thank you, Katie. I appreciate that.
That's it, Jeff?
For now, yeah.
Yeah, I can come back. Very good. Jason Lobach, any questions for Katie?
And I think, and I don't know if this is the right place to address this, but I'll follow it up with follow up on Jessica's question, and whether it's Melissa or whether it's to Dave. But what work was done at our schools over the summer regarding the ventilation? Because my understanding is we did a decent amount of work on that note.
Right. So, well, I'm going to let Dave, but I do know there are 13 MERV. Is that it, Dave? Did I get that right?
Yeah, we went from 8 MERV to 13 MERV filters, and the outside air dampeners are open between 30 and 35%.
So that's lovely, and I'm glad about that. But what the hell does that mean?
The 13 MERV actually catches the coronavirus droplet. It'll trap that size micron. So we're bringing in more fresh air, and the particles are going through the unit vent and being filtered. And we're bringing in the fresh air.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And then I wanted to follow up on your guys' comments regarding the contact tracing and what you're seeing that's missing, and whether that's missing across the board, or is this something that we're not doing in our district?
No, you can see like on the graphs that we saw how greatly increased our cases are. It's like 96% over the last 2 weeks. So I think we're going to end up doubling where we are now by December 15th. So, and it's already pretty unmanageable. So when transmission is this high and your percent is this high, you're not catching all the cases.
Okay.
And I think there's the governor and Dr. Ezike had a press conference on Friday where they went over all of this. But there's just not enough contact tracers, and, you know, if somebody calls, they don't answer the phone. I mean, what people really need to do is if they test positive, they need to tell everyone that they've been with themselves, you know, but that probably isn't happening. And when the public health department calls, you know, you need to answer the call. And they're not giving out your person, you know, they're not giving out the name of the person that you were in contact with, but they just want you to be aware so that you stay home because you've been exposed. Which, can you imagine, like with all the cases that we're having and how greatly it's increased? It's a near impossible thing. So at the level we're at right now, it's impossible to contact trace.
There's been several articles recently too about how previously in the spring it was very easier to see like, oh, there's an outbreak at a pork processing plant and that's where all these people, or you were at a crowded event. And now more and more people just don't have any idea where they got it.
Exactly.
They can't pinpoint it to one spot. And so it has just become a lot harder.
Yeah. Jason, we're doing our contact tracing in district. So I know one of the principals today told me they spent a good chunk of their morning doing just that. You know, so between the nurses and principal support and following up with phone calls to the parents. So the county has a team that supports us, but they do the contact tracing if it's a case that they find out about. But we're doing internally when a parent notifies us. We do it for our piece of it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand all that because when questions get raised regarding adaptive pauses, we have to look at the community outbreaks. We have to look at the current numbers, and we also have to look at the mitigation factors or the mitigation efforts that have been undergone, and come down to what's safe for our kids and for our staff and our buildings. You can't just look at one thing. We have to look at safety first. That's why I ask about when you brought the contact tracing as to, are we doing it? And so are we seeing, do we think our contact tracing is effective, and are we getting good responses from the people we contact, the people picking up the phones? Are we seeing those same kind of issues that Katie was talking about?
You know, when a parent calls, well, here's the situation that we're in. The parents are very forthcoming about where their kids have been. But as you'll see when we get to my presentation, we're struggling with some of the same things that other communities are, parties and sleepovers and, you know, larger family gatherings with no masks. And so for the most part, absolutely, yes, people are very forthcoming about telling us, you know, where their kids have been. And we know in terms of who we're putting on buses and who we have in classrooms together, you know, our end of the contact tracing is time consuming, but very doable. It's when we kind of hit a brick wall where nobody wants to say where they were at or who they were with. And we've had some of that go on, not as much as with older kids, but we've had some of that.
Okay. Actually,
I was going to say, I think that's all I have for now. Obviously, I think we'll probably have some more later on. Yep. Okay.
Well, thanks for actually the clarification on the contact tracing, because I thought we were doing something more targeted and specific also in the district, that we were taking some lead. So you confirmed what I thought.
Yeah, no, we do. I mean, our nurses have been trained and are the primary people doing contact tracing. But if our principals need to help with some of those calls, they are.
Well, why don't we do this? Let's bring Melissa's update into the conversation. If you don't mind staying at the mic, you can bring your chair up if you'd rather sit, and then we'll open it up for another round of questions. So Melissa.
Okay, Mike, do you want to pull up the other one? All right, go ahead and move on to the next slide. Uh-oh, do I have to? Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of where we are at. This was updated today. So these numbers are different than what you'll see on our dashboard, because our dashboard includes the close contacts and confirmed positive cases, so that number's a little bit lower. Today we went through and looked at all quarantines and positive cases. So Lincoln has 25 students currently on quarantine and or positive. Franklin has 26, Churchill has 35, Forest Glen has 42, 14 of them are in our pre-K program, and Hadley has 60. So on 11/6, we had a total of 147 students on the different types of quarantines and or positive. And by today, it was up to 188. Okay, Mike, go ahead, next slide. So when we talked about the gears and the different things that keep us open, and I'm gonna have to move my little, maybe I could minimize that, there we go. So our health data, obviously the county remains insubstantial. You know, I was on a call with the DuPage County Health Department, and I've got a couple different pieces of data to add to this. One of the things that they shared is, as a county, where we are now, we have not been here before. Some other data they shared is the doubling rate. So a while back, we were looking at 150 days was our doubling rate, and right now we're at just over 30 days. They shared that obviously Region 8, we will be going to Tier 2 mitigation. I believe the governor announced that today. Tier 2 kicks in at 12:01 a.m. on Wednesday. And if after 2 weeks we, you know, our numbers don't come down, then the plan is we will be very likely moving to Tier 3 mitigation. Some other things that they shared today on the meeting was about ICU and hospitalizations. And so just to give people a comparison, on October 9th, we had 76 people hospitalized due to COVID or COVID-like situations. 19 were in ICU. By 11/9, our hospitalization numbers are 316, with 60 of those being in ICU. And I think when Katie mentioned the deaths due to COVID, you know, we're seeing the peaks and valleys, but also treatment has gotten much better. So I think, you know, any death is too many, but the treatment is very different and much more advanced than when we first started. Something that was mentioned by the health department today is just that our ability to manage this in our healthcare systems is becoming compromised and will continue to be. Something we talk about at every meeting is that obviously schools are essential. Again, from the county health department perspective, schools are doing a great job, but it's the larger communities that are still not turning this around. Again, they shared, you know, that the outbreak information that was on the news site that Katie showed was not accurate. They're aware that there are more outbreaks than just one in DuPage County. None so far are in District 41. As I said, we're going to stick with 2 connected cases as an outbreak. Just things are, you know, really in this range. That is what we have shared with our parents, so that's what we're going to stick to. Let's see, what else did they say? The youth cases, the weekly youth case count trend showed an increase of 55.8% from week 43 to week 44. And they also said that there's been a change in terms of, for positive cases, in terms of not testing negative, because there's emerging research that's been talked about of how long you may test positive, even though you're no longer contagious. But they are really sticking to that it's a 10-day isolation, 24 hours fever-free with no medication, and that your other symptoms, if you had them, are improving. The department shared is it's just how much time that you're not wearing a mask when you're in those types of facilities. You know, Karen today really just emphasized whenever you bring people together, you are increasing the risk of transmission. And that, you know, there's only so long that we'll be able to hold off on any outbreaks as we're tackling. So again, to date, we've had no in-school transmissions, but we are seeing increasing positive cases and quarantines. Over the weekend, I have to compliment our principals and nurses. They are taking parent calls and emails and contact tracing and doing this all over the weekend as well, because I know I had ongoing information coming into me all weekend long. So I very much appreciate that. As of today, we are struggling, and we'll talk about this, to cover all of our blended classrooms. Today, we had a 38% fill rate, which meant principals had to go beg, borrow, and steal people to cover classrooms. We had teachers teaching remotely. Some rooms actually had some of our lunchroom staff in there providing the supervision, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later. Again, the gear of parent responsibilities. Our parents have been wonderfully cooperative, and it's just that COVID fatigue, but the parties and the sleepovers. We've had several calls and emails from parents who are concerned about things that are happening, and knowing that kids are coming to us after being in situations like that, and that there's a positive case connected to that. So our exclusionary requirements, our nurses are doing an amazing job of tracking all of that, and can tell you when our quarantines are due to come off of quarantine. Our safety protocols, everything that I have heard from our staff and our principals is that our kids are being wonderfully respectful and responsible about mask wearing and social distancing. And again, can't comment enough on the cleaning and ventilation changes and everything that's happening that we do control. Next slide, Mike. So what challenges are we having right now? Too many students need remote due to quarantine. So our remote classes are getting very full. There's something covering my slide, so let me see. Too few subs willing to work in person. It's making us unable to cover all of our staff absences. As I said, today we had a 38% fill rate. Marcy had shared with me at the end of today that about 20% of our sub pool is willing to work. We increased our sub pool significantly for this year, but people don't want to be in the building in person. So only right now about 20% of our subs are working and willing to show up for us. The projections show, and I'll show you this, that it will get significantly worse over the next several weeks. We were informed today of a local daycare center that will be closing for 5 days. There's an impact both on student quarantines, but also on staff who utilize that system. And also we're being notified by staff again that as their own home districts move back to remote, we're being notified of new FFCRA needs due to childcare or lack thereof related to COVID. And we are already dipping into our lunch supervisor staff to cover classrooms because staff are out on quarantine and they can teach remotely, but our struggle is covering the in-person part of that for student supervision. Next slide, Mike. When I said, the next several weeks are expected to get worse, thank you to Katie for this. But this is what the 4-week projections from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And Katie, if you want to comment on CHOP, Katie turned me on to this site. They are considered a leader in this field and have been displaying a dashboard and monitoring data from all over the country, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all over, and they consider weather. They use cell phone data to track. It's kind of creepy, but they track people going to non-essential businesses, and the weather and just like how we've been doing. And their projections, they go 4 weeks in advance, so the dotted line that you see going straight up is probably exactly what's going to happen. So,
right. And it does mirror some of the other graphs that we looked at. Everything is looking fairly similar.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike. So what is our strategy for all of this? Currently, our strategy is really limited to one. We have the opportunity to take an adaptive pause. So as we've said, if there's an outbreak in one building, we'll take an adaptive pause in that building. If there are multiple or it's across buildings, then we will take an adaptive pauses across the district. Over the holidays, which I'm going to talk more about, and this is where we can get into some conversation about testing, but our strategies then change to include antigen testing plan and adaptive pause to manage this moving forward, because we don't anticipate that the holidays are going to come and go. We know we'll still be dealing with COVID, but all of the projections show that this is going to be a time where everything is escalating. On our conversation today, the health department said, we can't even tell you where that ceiling is. So, we need to plan for this. And then in terms of longer term, as we've talked about, continued testing with the hopes that point of care is coming and that there will be cheaper and faster ways to test to give us the strategy that we could use beyond all of our mitigation measures that we have in place, beyond having to take an adaptive pause when needed, and then also to do ongoing testing. Go ahead, Mike. All righty, so this is just a look at today. So we had 51 absences or vacancies to fill. 26 of those needed fulfillment, meaning not every position needs a sub. 10 of those were filled, so we had a 38% fill rate. Unfilled positions that we were dealing with today, and you'll just see across the board, special education aide, 2 fifth grade teachers, 1 AEC teacher. So this is impacting everybody, in all areas. We're not seeing clusters in teachers, but this is just to give you an idea. On any given day, these are, it's a challenge to cover these and keep that adequate supervision and have it be to the same quality that we're hoping to be able to provide. Go ahead, Mike. So if the board moves forward with testing, one of the things that I've been trying to think about is how do we use this over what we know is happening, over the next several weeks. So we'll talk a little bit later in this about what our options are, how do we navigate the next couple of weeks, but we know we started today on blended, and we know that part of what we need to decide is, do we continue to hang on every day knowing that we could be unable to open the following day? So those question marks are just in there. We'll talk about this later in terms of what our options are to do to try to navigate this. But we know that we have a school improvement day coming up on the 20th. So fortunately, we don't have pre-K or kindergarten in school on those days. And then we are off the 23rd to the 27th for Thanksgiving. I put that Friday in there. It's important to note for a couple of reasons. So one of the testing strategies that we've talked about is coming off of a break, and how do we do that safely. Many districts are already deciding they're just going to take a pause and be on remote. Some have already decided to go remote and not come back until into January sometime. But with the potential to implement a testing program, can we re-enter after the Thanksgiving break safely? And so if the board approves this and we are able to pull this off, one suggestion might be that we would, if we are able to stay in person, that we would try to send testing supplies home on the Thursday and Friday, the 19th and 20th. That's a big if. And if so, then we would have testing kits come back on Monday and Tuesday, 11:30 and 12:1 which means we would be on remote. So we would start those first 3 days on remote while we had tests dropped off, parent or guardian or somebody, we would have a collection process in place so that we would hope to get all tests back from people who participate in testing Monday, Tuesday, and by Wednesday sometime have information back from the lab and make a decision on our number of positives or because it's antigen, it's probable. It's not a confirmed positive, but based on our probables, do we feel that it's safe to open? If we are safe to open, then we would do testing the following week again. Because again, we're coming off of a holiday where we know there's going to be family gatherings and travel. So test again Monday and Tuesday. Wait to get our lab information back and make a decision about staying open. Again, if we are able to, to stay open. And when I say blended testing, that means we would be implementing our regular testing procedures, whatever we would determine those to be. Then you see that we go into the holiday break and we would use the same process coming off of winter break where we would test before we entered back into school. So just wanted to give people an idea of how we might use testing to try and open during times when others may be doing full remote. We know it's a time of travel. We know it's a time of family gatherings, and we don't control that. What we do control is deciding if we could use this process to enter safely. Go ahead to the next slide, Mike. Again, that's a little bit more information about what it would look like after Thanksgiving. As I said, the first 3 days back, we would be testing and then hopefully have a decision by the lab, which means those TBD days are based on what our testing shows. And that's where we would be reaching out to some experts for what is determined to be a safe or acceptable percentage of probables coming back. And so there's different resources that we could look at to make that determination. So we wouldn't be deciding that by ourselves. And so again, it just plays out. Mike, go ahead. Same process for after winter break, and it really depends on if we're in person that last day before we go on break. The goal would be to get those test kids out to kids in the building so that they could take them home and staff. And then we would have a drop-off process. If we're by chance on remote, then our process needs to change and we have to figure out how to run an on-site testing. So the process will change pretty significantly depending on whether we have the opportunity to send those kids home with students and staff before they leave. So, and then just some decisions about moving forward is who tests once a week, who tests twice. Go ahead, Mike. So wanted to get a little bit into testing logistics if this is something that the board chooses to go. As I said, we would have to decide. It's really dependent upon how we end before Thanksgiving and how we end before winter break. Are we going to be having kids bring their test samples back to school and drop them off in the process that we'll spell out? Or do we have to figure out how to do it on site? So it really depends on what we're in, before that break happens. Okay. A little bit of an update, and it's probably, we decided to keep it open until 5. But as of this morning, we had 210 staff responses, 74% yes to participate. We had 859 student responses and 78% yes to participate. So we clearly would have some promoting to do to get those percentages up. And if this is the direction that the board goes in, the next thing that I would recommend would be to host a very detailed and thorough, Zoom webinar or information session so that we can walk people through the logistics of testing, consent, and all of those questions that they might have. Mike, next one. So navigating the next few days, and I think this gets back to Jess's questions. Again, as we've said, if we have an outbreak, we will have to go remote for that school. We're going to use 2 to determine an outbreak, and that would be a short notice notification. So obviously, if we had an outbreak in the middle of a school day, we'd be sending something home during that day. But that wouldn't be multiple days of notifications. Same thing if we had multiple buildings and we had to go remote across the district, that would be short notification. We don't control that. It's when we become aware. From day to day, we are struggling to cover our classrooms. So there are some things to consider, and I think this is probably happening in many districts around us. One option to consider is to go remote so that all students can remain with the teachers that they currently have. Parents would get, multiple days notice to prepare for this. Option 2 is to hang in there and then move kids into remote classrooms until we have to take an adaptive pause. Most of our classes are at or approaching the class cap. So we can continue to do this day by day. And as long as we can fill our positions and not have an outbreak, we can kind of hang in there as is, knowing that if we have a day where kids show up and we are really unable to fill those rooms and we just have to pull from that building or other buildings or anywhere we can, we'd have to go on an adaptive pause for that building. If it continues across the district, we'd have to go to an adaptive pause there. So at this point, I think besides discussing testing, I think that's the first conversation for the board to have. But then also I think the conversation of how do we strategize to get through this, and how do we want to go about this? Because, if our numbers tomorrow represent what happened today, then I would say we will be lucky to finish this week. And so that is truly what it is like. It's an every single day trying to jiggle the staff that we have and make sure that everybody's covered and everybody's getting what they need. So we can continue to go day by day. But there's many plates spinning right now. And so that's a conversation that we can certainly have. I don't know, Bob, if you wanted to have the conversation around testing now, if you wanted to invite Dr. Campbell and Brian to join when we get to that action item, or where did you actually, where do we want to have the conversation take place?
I don't think it makes sense to get into a levy discussion right now without, because continuity doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, you're referring to the next item.
Right.
That's,
And Melissa's suggestion was we wanted to skip ahead to Dr. Campbell.
Yeah. Or we can, we have this, and so we can put this on pause and then revisit it when we get to that. I just didn't know if you wanted to have the brunt of the conversation when you have discussion with the action item, or if you wanted to have discussion here.
I guess I don't even understand everything that was presented, so I'd like to have some time to ask questions about what you presented.
so, and my inclination would be to at least give the board a round to ask some questions to elicit some deeper thought or clear something up. And then I think we in fact will, when we get back to the action item, board members will have an opportunity to ask additional questions, and then we'll have Dr. Campbell join us then. So let me open it up so you can, thanks, Mike. If Dr. Campbell, however, is, but I'm not sure he is. Oh, you are there.
Hi, Ed.
If questions, Ed, are raised that you can answer, maybe it will make sense to invite you to be part of it at this point. In fact, I just realized just recall that you're in the Zoom at the moment. So, okay. Yeah, Katie,
Can I?
you certainly
Something?
can.
I'm sorry. I just want to be really accurate about the testing. What we were considering is not antigen testing. It's the RT lamp
Yeah,
test,
right.
which is because antigen testing is diagnostic, and the RT lamp test that Dr. Campbell presented to us last week is non-diagnostic.
Yes.
It needs a confirmatory test.
Yes.
So just so everyone knows. So we're talking about all the same
right
test
thing.
and the right test.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Katie. And first, Melissa, when I saw that on there, I thought you were going to introduce the Binax test.
Well, and I was, but we didn't,
Okay.
I got off task with that. So we'll get back to that after because
Okay.
I don't have any new information on it, but,
Well, then let's, did I see your hand up?
Well, also,
yeah, I don't think you have to stay.
It's very kind of you, Ted.
Keeping us awake.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, since you're very kind to offer our guest a seat. No, you're good. I'm sorry. I said Ted.
No, we couldn't hear Ted.
No, there was a Ted and an Ed.
There's a Ted and an Ed, and Ed thought I was referring to Ed, so he spoke. He thought I was calling him.
Oh,
So
I thought
Ted,
Ted spoke, but I couldn't hear Ted speak.
Oh, Ted, say something.
Your mic's off.
yeah, I'm not on.
Yeah, he's
Hold
actually
on a
on the
second.
Zoom. Oh, there he is now.
I can only hear you.
Somebody else.
All right, well, we're doing that. Okay, we'll do it. Let me jump online and we'll open it up for some questions. Bruce, do you have any questions for Dr. Kaskowski?
No, not right now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me get, Julie, I'm going to go to you. I'm not sure Ted is back with us. So Julie?
Yeah, I have a lot. It seems like of the 5 years that in that graphic or whatever we're going to call it picture, it seems like right now staffing is the hardest part about that. Is that accurate? Okay, and then I think I heard you say, because it was the question on my mind, and then it's iffy if we're going to make it to the end of the week for staffing. Is that what you said?
Yes. Well, so an outbreak
Trends
can,
continue.
yep, an outbreak can happen at any time.
Of
We know that. But staff, as we see the staff quarantine numbers increase, yes. So,
But today was hard. Tomorrow probably won't be easier, and Friday will probably not be any easier than that, right? Is that fair?
I
Of course,
think,
anything can happen.
yeah, I mean, anything can happen. I mean, we've seen from last week to this week, things increased significantly. So we'll see what tomorrow brings. It's really difficult to say, except we don't have any reason to think that they're going to
Be different.
get better right now.
Right, of course.
So I think tomorrow, if tomorrow feels like it did today, then we have reason to believe that these staff numbers are going to continue going up. And or if we see, more staff than even today starting to encounter childcare issues, we know that's another issue that we're going to have to deal with. So today was very tough for principals, and we don't have reason to think that that's going to improve. But they were able to cover things. They just had to pull people off of other jobs.
Okay. And then I'm having trouble finding it on my computer. Can we have Mike pull up that calendar again? Is that okay?
Sure.
Couldn't find a calendar
Because I
either.
have some questions about that.
Mm.
I don't know if I'm technologically illiterate.
I could find it either.
Okay. Jason can't find it either.
It was in Melissa's presentation.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Mike would have to go back. There we go.
Okay, yeah, he found it. So I have some questions on this. So for example, the week of 11:30 to 12:04.
Mhm.
I'm sorry to the Zoom people. Looking over here. Testing decision. Does that mean children are in the building for
No.
testing, or that we're testing?
No. So,
Until we get.
right. Remember I had shared, so if you go to, Mike, go down, where it's the slide that says Thanksgiving. So slide 9.
Okay. On site.
Oh, it is up there. See, I'm looking at the wrong one. So Thanksgiving, we would start remote for the first 3 days back. So 11:30, 12:1 and 12:2. And we would, as I said, it depends on whether we're in person or not before we leave for Thanksgiving break.
Right.
If we are, we would attempt to get everybody participating in tests, their testing materials before they leave for the Thanksgiving break. In that case, we'd be doing collection of samples on 11:30 and 12:1. If we're not in person when we leave for Thanksgiving break, then we would plan on-site testing. So either way, kids would not be present for those first 3 days.
Okay.
So we would either be collecting the test samples and getting them delivered to the lab, or we would be doing on-site testing and delivering to the lab. And then pending that decision, pending the lab results, we would make a decision on, what our probables looked like, and whether it's safe to open.
And we still need an expert to tell us what those numbers look like. Right?
I feel like that's something that we should ask for some guidance on, for whether it's the size of the building or the size of the district, what is an acceptable level of probables, that we would make that decision to open in person.
Okay. And then follow-up question, and somebody cut me off whenever I need to be cut off.
Okay.
Dr. Bruno.
I will do that. You're good so far.
My totally lost it. So we know, I need a reminder on a piece of information. So we know that with COVID, you can be, if you're going to show symptoms, you can be pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic for like 7 to 14 days before symptoms ever show and still be contagious, right? At what point, I just don't remember, because I feel like we've been presented with this, and maybe you guys, Katie probably knows. Sure. How many years, how many days after infection are you detectable with a test? Is that, I didn't mean to be on the spot.
Maybe, should we ask Dr. Campbell?
Yes.
If you had it.
Like if you have it, you don't have symptoms.
It's different for different tests. So a PCR, you can detect it with any level.
Like the day after? Or do you need several days to like build up and globule?
So if you got the PCR, which is the really deep spot, you can detect it. I think 2 days before you become symptomatic, or if you're asymptomatic, it will detect it.
That could be
And then the rapid antigen test, which is the Binax Now test, and that gives you results in 15 minutes, which is just the anterior, very front of urinary test. The optimal time to test is 3 days after being symptomatic, and they don't have a lot of data on asymptomatic. So we would only use that as a confirmatory test if we get that from the state. But I will have Dr. Campbell address the RT lamp test, because I don't know what his data is for that.
The Yale doctors who presented at something said that the consensus was that most people could test positive between 2 and 4 days after.
But their test is a PCR.
But their test is a PCR.
And it's diagnostic, so
Right.
totally
So it's a
different for
different-
every single test, which is really hard
And
to make it understandable. Yes.
Thank you. But my question,
Can we,
I asked,
you want to ask Dr. Campbell?
I don't know if he's ready.
Yeah, he is.
to
Hey,
sing it.
Ed, could you join us for this? Julie Hill has a question we think is appropriate for you, because we're actually considering in the context of the RT lamp test. So Julie, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Campbell. Thanks for coming back. My question is, how many days with your RT lamp test, how many days after exposure would someone test a probable, what do they call it, probable positive or whatever?
Right.
Like how long does that take for it to show up?
Right. I would say two things. Number one, because of the variable course of disease, it's very hard to put a very specific number on that, right? There's definitely what we would call an eclipse period, where people are undetectable by any test for 24 to 48 hours. Some people are detectable right after that 48 hours. Some people go longer, but there just hasn't really been a lot of screening of asymptomatic people after an exposure to really know. I would say that there was some data from a group in London that showed that earlier on, saliva can be a little bit more effective than a nasal swab. And then after, as the course of infection goes, that flips a little bit. So that saliva goes down and the nasal swabs go up. But that's, data that I've seen that we haven't done experiments like that, but I believe that.
Okay. And I only asked because, thank you. I asked because the testing timeline on here, if people are coming back, and personally, like I'm having Thanksgiving with the 4 people that live in my house, but I know that's not going to be for everybody. If they're getting together with people, whoever these people are, maybe Thursday, maybe Friday, maybe Saturday, like, is that going to be, obviously some is better than nothing, but is that too soon to be making a decision on whether or not we reopen our buildings is basically my question.
Yeah, I think you would generally expect stupid behavior on Thursday and Friday to be detectable on Monday. Saturday and Sunday, you wouldn't detect the consequences of that behavior on Monday.
Right, but you think Thursday and Friday would show up?
More than likely, realize that every COVID case is a snowflake, but yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
That
for
was
now.
good. Oh, thank you, Julie. Actually, well done. Entertaining and informative at
I
that.
mean to be entertaining.
Yeah. Ted, did you get your audio going?
Did I?
You did.
All right, good. I just have a question. I have many questions, but I'm not quite sure exactly which phase of the meeting we're in at this point. When you say 38% coverage, Dr. K, that means you need another 62% teachers in order?
So what it meant, and Marcy could maybe jump in because this comes right out of ASAP data, our subsystem.
Okay.
Out of the positions that we needed subs for, we were able to fill 38% of them with 38% of those vacancies with subs. The rest had to be filled by pulling people off of other things.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Because not filling them is not an option.
Okay.
So we had to pull people away from other,
Okay. You may have said that. Sometimes some of the stuff that you deal with day to day,
That's okay. Ask away.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And if there's any confusion, let me clear it up. This is an opportunity to ask Melissa questions based on her presentation. So she put a lot up there, and Dr. Campbell has generously agreed to also attend, and Katie and Ellen are here. So it's probably going to be a bit broader of a conversation, but it really should be associated with the presentation that Melissa made available to us. Okay, let's see. Let's go back online. Jess, you have questions for Dr. Kaskowski.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if it's a repeat of Julie's because I got booted from my internet connection. I had to wait to get let back in. I didn't quite understand the schedule when you had those days up there. So week 1 after Thanksgiving break, I understand that we won't be in the school. We'll be doing remote while we test and get results. And then we'll make a decision and possibly could be back in the schools on Thursday, Friday. What I wasn't clear is about the second week. Those dates were also red, but I'm assuming if we're in school on Thursday, Friday, we would be in school on Monday?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we would do testing our typical, or what we would think our typical way would be. Of course, if our probables are too high, we would have to discuss again doing an on-site testing instead of just bringing your sample to school.
Right. And if we test, I guess we had talked about in some cases, some scenarios, testing twice a week. So I'm wondering why test Monday to Monday versus say Monday and then Friday to know for the following Monday.
Right. We had talked about doing a second test that first week of 11:30 to 12:04. I'm not going to say that it's absolutely impossible. I think for our first round of testing, we would need a significant amount of help to be ready in order to do either, on-site testing at the beginning of the week or drop off of samples And then, we would only do that second test of the week, I think, if we were in person and trying to make a decision about staying in person. But to turn over that many would be, Dr. Campbell, and you can weigh in because you've actually seen districts do this, pulling off a second round of testing that week. How, I think logistically, if we could pull it off, we could.
I think, actually, I'm sorry, I think Dr. Campbell's kind of leaning into the mic. Maybe he can address that directly. Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, there are logistical barriers. You're going to have a lot of kits to make, right? And you have a lot of kits to collect. Is it feasible? At this point, I've seen enough things to say that nothing is impossible, but the bandwidth that you'll need in terms of person power to create those kits and to collect them and put them in racks for delivery to us, it's not insignificant. That's why I think, as you roll this out, it might be wise to ramp up and do a run where, I think we're going to do 10 this week to get a sense of, can you print the barcodes and everything else? But as you might imagine, 100 is different than 10, and 1,000 is different than 100, and 3,000 twice in a week. Well, I've never seen that done before. I believe it could be done, but it would be a heavy lift.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, and I guess, yeah, I don't know if you would prioritize one population over another, like we had talked about at the last meeting, where we would say teachers need to be tested twice or something like that. I guess Dr. Campbell kind of addressed another follow-up question. I'm not sure it's appropriate here, but I had it certainly when we were going to discuss the contract, is the whole idea of the pilot. I thought had been in the contract, and then I didn't see it. So if we decide to move forward, am I hearing correctly that we would do 10 tests this week as a...
Right. So if the board moves forward with testing, then yes, we would do a smaller scale pilot just to do a run through of printing the labels and stickering the tubes and all that to get a feel for how that works. So yes.
Like in the 10 range. So we're not really testing a significant amount of people in any way.
No.
To get results, just to do the thing. So, okay. All right. I feel like I do have more questions, but maybe you have to come back to me, Bob.
Okay, Jess, thanks so much. Thank you. Let me also, Guillermo, Mr. Guzman, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One clarification question, Dr. K. On the one slide where you had all the positive and quarantine cases by school, what was the time frame on those numbers? I just like Julia, having issues getting to the presentation.
Okay. That would be, Mike, that slide 2. The quarantines and positives, is that the slide you're talking about, Guillermo?
Yeah, correct.
By school. So this was as of today. So when we did an end of the day check-in, our total numbers as of Friday at the end of the day, when we update the dashboard, we were at, again, but keep in mind the dashboard does not have all categories of quarantine put on. But these numbers at the end of the day on Friday were 147. And then by today, when we did a check-in, they were up to 188.
But those were numbers that we identified since we opened last week, or they just that way?
Yeah, no, these are how it stands today. So as of today, Lincoln has 25 students either in quarantine or are positive. Franklin has 26 students that are in quarantine or are a positive. So these are as of today numbers.
Okay. And this might be a too early question, but what kind of conversations have you had with the team about how do we come back from an outbreak or from the adaptive? What's the process? What are the rules? What are we looking at?
I'm going to put up the second place one.
Melissa, did you get that? Did you hear the question?
Yeah. Guillermo, how do we come back from an outbreak? Well, we would time, most people are doing, when you look at districts that are taking an adaptive pause, roughly 14 days, 10 school days, but it's really, you have to, kind of make that determination based on what's going on. If it's based on an outbreak, or if it's based on an inability to staff your programs, then obviously you're looking at when staff are coming back from a quarantine and trying to plan around that. The trouble is right now is as we have people come back, we have more people going out. So.
Thanks.
Thank you, Guillermo. Mr. Lobo,
My mind's running right now.
your mind's running? You want to catch up to your mind?
Yeah, I need to formulate.
Okay.
I guess if I have one now that I can start with, and it's been kind of overarching for now. And it's to Dr. Campbell, and if you're sitting there, I moved off my Zoom screen. I guess, well, I just start with Dr. K and then to Ed. So I know last week you sent out that email regarding asking parents, hey, non-binding, would you consent to having your kids tested if we were to do this? What percentage of emails did you get back to parents say, yeah, we agree to test your kids?
Right.
I thought you had a number.
78%. Yeah, 78%. I believe we had 800 and some odd.
Of students. 850, 800.
Right, the number of families.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and what percentage of families is that?
Oh, percentage of, I can't tell you off the
Okay.
top of my head.
Okay, so, but Dr. Campbell, let's just assume that number plays out and we get a 75 to 80% participation rate in testing. Is that participation rate successful to use the data that comes back to determine the safety to keep schools open or not?
Oh, I think on that front, absolutely.
Okay.
Right? You'll lose a little bit of value and you'll gain it as you get closer to 100% is just removing everybody and actually modulating spread. But the kind of numbers that your district is talking about, you wouldn't expect the numbers or the percentage to be any different after 50% as you would after 100%, right? It's
So from a scientific data perspective, that's more because it's kind of similar to a random sampling where you're taking a percentage of the whole and applying that to the whole.
right.
Okay.
Well, and keep in mind too, this is after, sending out an email with some information.
No, I completely understand that. I'm just trying to use that as a base participation rate to say how the test can be utilized for purposes of keeping our schools open.
Yeah, and I would expect that it would go up after a solid information night.
Right. I will have more questions. I will have more comments. Like I said, my mind's kind of running based off of Melissa's right now. I kind of got to get my thoughts around it.
Take your time. Jess, your hand is up, so why don't I give you the opportunity to raise your question?
I found them in my thread. So I guess this might have been addressed when I was off, but who is it that we would ask for the expert advice on the acceptable level of positives?
So we have been hard at work reaching out to a variety of people in hospital settings.
Yeah, and Jess, if you recall, maybe somewhat tongue in cheek, you assigned me that homework. But I did take it seriously, and I do have a call into, and I've gotten a response from the UIC School of Public Health. So I should be talking to somebody this week about the possibility of having somebody local. No promises, but yeah, I do know those people well at Public Health. So thank you for the nudge. And I think Katie was also, she's nodding her head. She's also talking to people.
And I guess it's interesting to me that we would phrase it that way as acceptable level of positive cases, because I guess to me, that's the point. We would be filtering them out and they wouldn't come. So isn't that the whole point of doing the test?
Can I, Jess, that's an important clarification. And maybe Ed, you can, Ed's making donuts over there.
No, I think that's just different to make it done.
Yeah, I know what Ed's doing. It's great. It's in real time. Ed, I'd like you to jump in here if you can, because my understanding is that while you would love to catch every positive case, that's really not realistic, but you're using surveillance to address clusters or potential breakouts into clusters, because that's where you're going to get a spread that's so high, you're going to shut your system down. Am I
right.
correct in that?
Yeah, so for example, one of the grades of one of our elementary schools has been shut down because surveillance revealed something that was originally shocking and was traced back to a very ill-advised sleepover party last weekend. So now they don't have school, right? And so it was a really rough night in lab watching all these things come up. And then we thought, oh my God, maybe there was spread in school, except everyone was at the sleepover party.
Oh, good.
Yeah, good times.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, and I'm guessing participation rate would be a factor in that discussion as well. If we have high levels of participation rates and we have, or if really more so if we have a low level of participation rate, and one might think that the people who are less likely to participate are also the ones maybe more likely to do the risky behaviors, that if you see X number of percentage in your general pop that's doing it, that you could factor out that the people that are choosing not to be tested would have either that or higher.
I'd like to jump in here. I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think what you're seeing with testing across the board is that it's access to testing and making sure that all people in our school community are getting access to that test. That you're not in your head, Katie. Is that typically more accurate?
And I don't.
Step up, Katie. Step in here. Yeah.
I don't think you can equate behavior with. I think there's a lot of factors that would go into a parent making that decision for their child, and then the other thing to consider is that the actual child will have to assent to the procedure. So a parent can consent for the child, but if the child does not want to do the test, they don't have to do it either. So I don't think you can equate those things. I think there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't want to do it. You know, they either wouldn't want to know, don't want their kid to miss school. They don't want the hassle of having to go do a confirmatory test, which actually at this point is really kind of a challenge to get. You can stand in line at the county and they close down at 8:15 a.m. every day at this point. They run out of tests. You know, CVS has a waiting list. So there's a lot of logistical things if you're a working parent that you might not want to consent to it because it's going to make your life harder, you know, and your kid can still go to school if they're not participating. So I don't think that it would be permission to have risky behavior and go infect everyone at school. I think it would be more of the inconvenience of having to either take your child to the doctor or try and find somewhere to do a COVID test.
And Katie, on that,
yes,
excuse me, on that point, and I don't think Melissa has an update, but if the Binax Now test is provided to us at the quantities that we would want, and it was consistently provided, and we were part of the pilot that the state instituted, then we actually would have a confirmatory test.
Yes.
Right in the building.
Yes.
Okay.
Right in our buildings.
Okay.
All 6, the central services office and every single school.
Outstanding. Okay. Well,
yes.
Okay. So.
And we'll get it in 15 minutes. So.
I love it.
I love it.
Got to get back on the, I think maybe someone will take our call in Springfield.
Well, they emailed back. So they
did.
So they looked at our
application.
Yes, that's this big. And said that we need to apply for multiple sites. So they said,
wow.
Yeah. So we have reapplied for 6 sites and like millions of tests.
Oh, well, I'm encouraged to hear that. Did they give you any date?
No.
Oh, no.
Okay, I was asking too much.
It's moving forward is all.
All right, well, that's good news.
You got a response in less than 3 months.
That's good.
Amazing.
All right, okay.
So I appreciate that there's
that you can't say that just because somebody is not opting to take the test at the school that it's risky behavior, that they're going to engage in riskier behaviors. But I guess I'm looking for a way to extrapolate the I guess I would be once we have an expert, a way to extrapolate the rate we get and the people who are participating and how that would apply to the rate of people who chose not to participate, because that would be the risk that we have to mitigate, not so much the risk of the people that we already tested. And I guess turning directions a little bit back to your presentation, Melissa, is you presented option 1 and option 2. Are you leaning towards one of those options as a recommendation, or are you waiting for us to come to consensus on one or the other?
As of tonight, no. I wanted to touch base with the board because I know last time people had some questions or input that they wanted to share. We're not at a point to have a clear recommendation that we should do one or the other. But I think it's important for our community to understand that every single day it's kind of a juggling act. And so we can take a proactive approach to taking a pause and giving people, a couple of days notice on that. Or we just know that the more we move forward, if things continue to progress the way they are, ultimately we're going to get there, and we'll be giving families shorter notice. If it comes down to being unable to staff our buildings or having an outbreak, we can't give much notice on those things. So, I don't have a recommendation tonight other than to say we're really hoping we could make it through the week. I think, seeing what tomorrow's numbers look like, the kind of parent calls that come in terms of additional quarantines or additional positives, will be telling. I mean, as of today, we were able to staff things. It took a great deal of effort at the building level to pull that off. I think if we see another day like this, that brings up a different conversation, we won't be able to sustain that. But as I said, it really comes down to either being proactive and giving families some notice, or knowing that, every day kind of, we just wait for one of those scenarios to happen, that either we can't staff or we do have an outbreak.
Yeah, and I'd like to always do a better job of keeping that statement on our wall in my mind of the students at the heart of every decision. So like if we're thinking about the impact of students with option 1, or now I forget which option is which, but where let's say is options 1 where we kind of we just sort of call it and say it's too hard, and then that means kids are going back into the remote, thinking about the impact on students of that, versus option 2 where they may not be getting the stability either, because we're going to have X many teachers and perhaps that number is growing, where they're getting somebody who's not their teacher thrown in there at the last minute. And then so that's like kind of question number 2. Question number 1, I mean. Question number 2 is, the impact on staff. So of either option. Can you talk us through that? So impact on students, number 1 of both options, and impact on staff of both options.
Right. I think parent communication that I'm hearing from right now is really, really mixed. Some people who would like us to call remote because, as some have said, it's going there anyway. They would like their kids to stay with their current teacher. And some even said, after the high school made their announcement, that it's just better for families who have kids in both if they knew sooner rather than later and we were on the same game plan. And then I'm hearing from just as many people who want us to keep trying to plug along. So obviously option 1 is a little bit more proactive and gives families more time. and teachers more time to prepare to make that shift to remote. Option two, means we're stretching kind of day by day to provide as much in person as we can.
And I think I had asked earlier, like what percentage of students we have at remote, and it was still at 25%, which is roughly where we've been. And I think I don't know if that reflects people's desires to go remote or stay full time, because I know sticking with the same teacher is a really powerful force at play here. And when you choose remote, you can't do that. But do we have a wait list for remote based on our quarantines and whatnot?
So we don't have a wait list as of today, but we have a couple of classrooms across the district that have hit their class size cap, and many that are approaching their class size cap.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what, and then one of the questions I had asked earlier that you might have gotten more clarity on in meetings this afternoon was if you know of the percent of districts in DuPage that are now in full remote.
Yeah, we really didn't. Our meeting was really content heavy today. So they didn't do a quick check-in to see who was doing what.
Is there a source of data for that information? I feel like we've talked about.
Yeah, no, there's
just
not.
In the conversation. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there's a couple more places that have either announced, because of, again, it's the difficulty with staffing your classrooms. I've not heard anyone say that they've had an outbreak. It's the difficulty staffing both your in-person and blended model due to staff quarantines.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't even think I let you fully respond to the last question. So the impact on staff of calling it early versus calling it day by day.
I think that, you'd have to ask staff. Katie, do you have anything you want to throw in for that? It really, as I said, option one.
Katie McCluskey, right? You mean?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I never asked Katie. Katie M.
So, I mean, obviously it's easier to plan instructionally when you know what you're planning for and when you're prepared. So certainly, I don't know that any of this is necessarily ideal when it comes to instruction, because either way, planning is taking a hit. Because you're either planning on the fly because you don't know what's coming, or you're now planning to be fully remote, but ahead of time. If that makes sense, Jess. I'm not sure that necessarily answers your question, but I do think that it's hard for teachers. It's hard for them to plan when they're not sure what's going to happen from day to day.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think there's a lot of evidence that uncertainty is rough on people. But so I guess going back to the question about the impact on kids, I mean, I feel like Melissa, you answered it by talking about how parents are feeling and the feedback you're hearing from parents. But I guess I'm wondering more from an educational perspective of trying to get a few more days, which, I mean, it sounds like it's just a few more days. We don't really know of in-person instruction versus kind of just pivoting and knowing you're keeping the same teacher and you're going back to that thing that we knew and you were doing just a week ago.
If I could jump in, Jess, I think these are really difficult questions to answer in any kind of objective or definitive way. I think if the district, and one would assume they're going to be sensitive to the impacts and they would know them better than we would know, that they will take that into considerations, but maybe try to model it all out or balance it all out, what percentage of this or what percentage of that. I don't know you're going to be able to get an answer to that. It's more of a discussion that the district will need to have and take into consideration. And I think we have to trust that they'll do that. So I don't think you're going to get, you're asking a big question that doesn't lend itself to some sort of definitive response on the spot. And it may change depending on who's answering it, quite frankly.
Well, and it's very different by family as well,
In terms of impact on students.
and whether the value is on in person or maintaining all of the same teachers, that vastly different opinions and thought processes. So it's really hard to say one is more or less important. And it's just kind of the reality of what every day is like. Some of this we can try to stay ahead of and control, and some of it we just have to be ready to respond with very little planning.
I guess maybe I'm still confused. Are we discussing as a board option 1 or 2, or are you just presenting those to us as things that we should keep on mind that we know you're
right? No, just wanted to hear where the board had input on, and also to share with our families kind of the situation that we're in, which is not any different than anybody else is in right now. So those are pretty much the two, we only have really 2 choices right now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you want our input, I think you know where I stand on that. I wanted option 1 a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, that's just where I feel we're headed. But I appreciate all the reasons why we're at option 2. So right now.
All right, Jess. Thank you. I do have a question for Catherine McCluskey to distinguish between Katie. And Katie, maybe not, unrelated to the larger impact question, but when we hear about staffing challenges and having to fill classes and maybe classes getting very close or at the cap, it raises a question for me about any impacts on the teaching quality, right? Obviously, that's going to be very relevant to what the students are experiencing and quite frankly, to the satisfaction and confidence of the instructor wanting to teach under the very best of circumstances. So any thoughts about how teaching quality may be compromised as we look at these kinds of numbers? Any concerns that you have at this point? I have no doubt that teachers are working very hard and are educating and students are learning, but as the head of instruction, what's your observation? You're on, Katie, you're muted.
Sorry. I mean, of course, teachers are trying their very, very best and they're doing everything that they can. I think as the numbers go up, the challenges become more and more instructionally, because if the teacher can't be in the classroom, that has an impact on instruction. Whether they're able to stream in or not, it still has an impact because they're not in front of their kids how they typically would be. So I think as the numbers go up, in-person learning becomes more of a challenge. It doesn't mean that remote learning is better. I mean, in-person learning is always better, but when your numbers are going up so high and it's not staffed by your classroom teachers and they're not able to be there in person, that has a huge impact on instruction.
That's an important marker, I think, and I know the district has thought about it. I know I'm not bringing something up that's novel. So I appreciate your stating that clearly. All right, thank you.
That's a conversation that we have every single day, knowing how much value our families put on in-person learning. That's been made loud and clear. But that was communicated at a time when our numbers weren't what they are now. people's thinking changes. And so every day we're having these same questions that we ask ourselves and have to make decisions on. So yes, I mean, and I'm absolutely certain that we continue to have families that have vastly different opinions on all of this. But at a certain point, we'll have to make some decisions here, you know, as I said, either by outbreak or because we just can't fill our classrooms. And so that is the very real situation that we're in.
But from a policy perspective, from a board perspective, I'm sorry to jump in. I think it's important that we have identified factors that we're looking at to make these decisions. And that first factor is safety.
Safety.
And safety for our staff, safety for our kids. And that's where the conversation starts. And that's an important item that everyone in this community understand. And then after safety, other items come into to that discussion, including mental health for both staff and students, and from a large scope of mental health, as well as quality of learning and instruction. And I think honestly, those two are tied together, but we have identified factors that we're looking at in making these decisions. So it's not like just taking a shot in the dark.
Not at all.
And so while it's difficult and while it's hard to wrap your mind around at times, and while it's hard to make these decisions based on the impact that they have, it's not that these decisions are being made blindly. They're being made based on factors that are determinative to the safety of our kids, the safety of our staff.
Absolutely. I think, you know, as I said, if we will respond to an outbreak immediately. That's a non-negotiable. And I think, you know, navigating some of this, you know, this isn't going to end if the board approves testing. I think we need to go into this knowing that we're going to have some challenges to deal with and encounter, and it's going to be a little bumpy when we first start. You know, you know, it will absolutely be bumpy. You know, going into testing when we're not sure if we'll be able to do it in person or by dropping off samples, but that's just the reality of COVID. And then you overlay it with the holidays, and it's quite a challenge to try and work around a very different calendar because of holidays and knowing that there's travel and family get-togethers. So, you know, it's just, you know, as I said, it's doing our best to try and navigate something that's become very difficult and then add the holidays onto it. You know, so it's exponentially more complicated. But, you know, if this is the route we go, I think we have a path. We just need to be very honest and transparent that it's going to be a bumpy path. And, you know, people need to understand that and appreciate it.
Okay. Board, what I want to do is we will come back to the agreement and the motion on testing, which will also provide an opportunity to ask about the agreement. Dr. Campbell, if you can stick around just a bit longer, we'll revisit your expertise perhaps at that point. Okay. Let's give Melissa an opportunity, though, to introduce under board governance a required step here, and that is to have Eric talk a little bit about the Levy 101.
Eric told me, I just gonna step out really quick.
Oh, come on, Jay. You know you love it.
I do. You taught me a lot about this. You did really well.
No offense there. No offense.
Yeah, no, I'm not offended. I get it. Mike, can you project? There we go. So just briefly, the idea tonight is just to kind of get the board conversation started about the levy, the steps involved, the process we follow, because at the next meeting, and Mike, if you want to go one slide forward, this is just a timeline of what's going to be coming over the next month and a week, I guess. You know, at the next regular business board meeting on the 23rd, we will present the preliminary levy. It's a requirement that an estimated levy be presented to the board at least 20 days prior to adoption. So that's what we're going to do on November 23rd. It will be on display and visible for anybody that would wish to look at it starting the 24th. And then on the December 14th meeting, we will hold a public hearing and then the board would officially approve the levy. So Mike, next slide. So tonight, I'm just going to kind of go over some of these things. Some of these slides are a little bit repetitive, and feel free to stop me with questions if they come up during it. This is similar to something I've presented in the past, but I think it's always nice to have a refresher. So like I just mentioned, the board must estimate the levy at least 20 days prior to adoption. It has to be formally approved by the board and filed with the DuPage County Clerk by the last Tuesday in December. And then the last bullet here is an important one I want to touch on. It says a truth and taxation hearing is required if the levy will increase by 5% or more over the previous year's levy. Typically, we do not ask for a levy that is greater than 5% than the previous year, but we always do a levy hearing just because it's good practice. There's no harm in doing so. It permits the community the option to make comments if they choose to do so. Next slide. So the way the levy is calculated each year is you look at the previous year's levy, and then you have to look at the CPIs, the Consumer Price Index. The CPI is what you can increase the previous year's extension by. So for the 2020 levy, we'll look at the 2019 CPI, which was 2.3%. So we take last year's levy, we multiply it by 2.3%, and that's the new incremental add to the levy based on CPI. The second part that is available for an addition to the tax levy is new property. So new property comes on our tax rolls and it's taxed at our tax rate. These are the two parts of the levy that change year to year. You start with your aggregate extension base, which is basically your previous year levy. You add the CPI increment, and then you add an estimate for new property. So next slide. It's a little bit repetitive here, but it talks about the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act, commonly referred to as PTEL. PTEL is that public act that really controls what schools are permitted to ask for in a levy. The intent of this act was to kind of limit and control school districts and eliminate that option for a school district to go say, give me an extra 20% because we want to build a new building. So this is what is referred to as a tax cap. Most districts across the counties are under a tax cap. So like I said, the second bullet, the limits to your increase are the lesser of 5% or CPI. CPI has not been 5%, I don't think historically ever when I looked at the chart. So it's usually CPI plus the value of new property. This third bullet is an important one. Each year when we do the levy calculation, if you recall, I always kind of talk about, what should be our estimate for new property because we really don't know that. The assessors that are involved with our boundaries usually will give me a best guess, but again, it's the best guess, and we don't know that until the clerk publishes the actual amount of new property growth when they return that report to us in early spring. So when we calculate the levy, we're forced to make an estimate. I already talked about CPI from last year. Just thinking back, the 2018 CPI was 1.9, so this year it is a little bit higher. And the last one is an important bullet to just speak to real quickly. PTEL, or the tax cap law, it restricts you to the lesser of 5% or CPI plus new property, regardless of what we want or what we ask for. So let's say we decide we want to levy 15% because we feel like we really need it to cover some of these costs we're getting this year. The DuPage County Clerk will look at our request and automatically lower it down to the permissible maximum amount under PTEL. So in no case can you get more than the law would permit you to do so. So next slide. Timing is always kind of a tricky thing with the levy, so it's one that I like to spend a little time on. So the 2020 levy will fund the school year that starts July 1st, 21. So what's interesting, what's not interesting, but what is important to note about District 41 is the taxes that come in June, or we refer to them as early taxes, and we defer them until July 1st, meaning we know that those taxes, the intent of them is to fund the 2021 to 2022 school year, even though we're asking for them in December of 20. I talk about the early taxes thing on the bottom. So we don't defer them in the sense that we don't collect them. We collect them, we have them in our bank accounts, but we do not show them as received in our fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. Next slide. This is an important one to consider as well. If the district levies less than the maximum permitted under the tax cap law, the district forfeits that taxing capacity for all future years. So what this would mean is if we do not collect or request all of the CPI increase, or we estimate new property at an amount that's lower than the actual new property experience for our district, the taxes related to those amounts are lost forever. So it's not something that we can go back and say, hey, give us that back. We made a mistake. Once our levy is set for this year, you cannot change it in the sense that you cannot increase it. As I mentioned earlier, is if you ask for more than what is permissible under PTEL, they will bring it down. However, if you ask for less, they will not bring it up. And when I say they, I'm talking about the DuPage County Clerk. Next slide. Here's a slide I wanted to put in just to talk about these two terms. Abatement is a word that really isn't intuitive. It's a word that's specific to levy, and it has a very specific definition. So as you see here, number one is the under levy. That's what I've mentioned just a second ago. If we ask for less than's permittable to us, that amount is going to be forfeit for all future years. What an abatement is if we ask for, well, I guess regardless of what we ask for, whatever we ask for, let's say we ask for the maximum, and then we decide that we really don't need to collect all of that. What we would do is we would tell the clerk that we're going to do an abatement. So basically that preserves our debt extension base. So the maximum amount for the next year, it's preserved. However, we tell the clerk we actually don't need to receive all of those taxes. So when they calculate the tax bills and send them out to those tax parcels within our boundary, they hold back that abatement amount. So for instance, we've done this the last, we didn't do it in 2020. We did it in 2019 and 2018. We did an abatement from the bond fund. So what that did is basically, it told the clerk that even though, I'm just going to use an example. Let's say our bond payment is 1.7 million. We abated, I think, $125,000 in 2018. So we said, don't send us the 1.7 million. Send us 1.575, hold back 125,000 because we don't need that money to make our obligated payments to the debt service. Next slide. I was just going to mention here the debt service. This will be the fourth year that we're levying for the 2017 referendum bonds. The first year obviously being December of 2017. I talked about 2018 a second ago. We did abate some of the debt service extension from 2019, 63,831, and we did no abatement in calendar year 2020 for the 2019 levy. Next slide. Again, I spoke to this earlier, so some of these slides are a little bit, they're duplicates, but the clerk's office looks at what we ask for, and then they consider PTEL, and if we've asked for more than what is permissible under PTEL, they automatically reduce us. And like I mentioned, we already spoke to this, but if we ask for an amount in excess of PTEL, which is very common, and most districts, in fact, do that when they estimate for new property. For instance, if the decision is to levy the max, meaning they want to capture all of the CPI increment and all of the new property growth, you don't know that new property growth number. So what we typically do is we look at the history of new property growth for our boundary, and then we make an estimate greater than that, knowing full well that we're probably shooting above what the reality will come to be. And then we're relying on the clerk to bring us down to the permissible max. Next slide. That's it. So again, like I said, kind of a quick run through. I wanted to touch on some of the key terms, the calendar, and what will be coming, at our next regular board meeting at the end of November and our one meeting in December. So with that, I'm happy to talk about the levy some more with any questions. I know there'll be many.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Well, let's, since you're anticipating, let's get the party started here. Guillermo, do you have any questions for Eric about the process?
Hey, thank you, Eric. Just one quick question on the property tax. We will have kind of like with the how our estimate last year compared to actuals, were we? You do have that number?
I do have it. What we estimated last year was 20 million, and the actual new property growth was just north of 12 million.
Okay.
So for last year's levy, we asked for the max CPI increment, and then we estimated a new property number larger than the reality is. So in effect, what that meant is we got the maximum last year.
Okay.
You know, and that the difference between the 12 million of actual versus the $20 million we put into our estimate is what's called asking for more, knowing most likely the clerk is going to come back and tell you, yeah, you thought there was 20 million, there's actually 12 million, so we'll bring you down to the max.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Eric. Julie, any questions for Eric?
No, after a couple years of having this explained to me, I think I've got it.
Oh, listen
So
to
thank
that.
you,
Julie
Eric.
thinks he's got it.
Well done.
Love it.
Okay, very good. Very good. Let me jump back online. Bruce, any questions for Eric?
Yeah. What's the lowest we can go on the levy legally?
What do you mean the lowest? The lowest would be 0.
Okay, you can't go negative, right?
No, you can't go negative. But if you go to 0, you can never levy. You can never get more than CPI. So 0 plus CPI would be 0. So we would never
And
get $10 again.
if we went to 0 on this levy, what would the impact be to the dollars coming in?
Bruce, clarify what you mean by 0. 0 on the CPI or 0 on total ask?
If we were to ask, how much are we levying for now? Or I'm sorry, how much are we getting right now from this levy? Like how many $1 million this year? I guess if we zeroed it, it would be, let's say it was $50 million. If we zeroed it, it would be $50 million again. Okay. What is it expected to be if we ask for the max?
No,
and the delta between the two?
No.
So last year, our levy exclusive of the debt payment was right around $47 million. And I actually have a spreadsheet open because I've already started the calculation for the 2020 levy. And if you take last year, back to my explanation, you take last year's extension and you add to that the CPI increment of 2.3%. That would return new property taxes related to the CPI increment of just north of $1 million, $1,089,000. So I guess that's right. If you went with a 0% CPI, you'd be $1 million and $1,090,000 off on the table that you would never have access to in future years.
Okay, and we've done that in years past on a 4-3 vote in 2018 and 17. Took our gross number from our gross surplus from about 5 million down to 3.5 million in surplus. And I know we've had COVID-related expenses, but since 2018, since April of 2018, do you know how many people we've hired in addition? Because we had a 0. We were gonna hire, we sort of had, if you want a new hire here, you need to offset that. And we sort of had that view, even though we put in some extra. So there was a big ask, I think, for about 3 or 4 special ed. I can't remember if it was aides or teachers back in 2018, and we decided to add that. Do you know how many we've added since 2018, April of 2018?
I don't have that in front of me.
Off topic, but Eric, I think there's also other factors besides levy that pulled into that special ed.
Bruce, what I was going to say is that I think that question.
Wait, hold on, Bob.
Well, I'm trying to simply point out that I don't think Eric's going to be able to just answer that question now, particularly since he's here to present on the process, not the actual, right? So you really can't ask him. It's not appropriate to ask him that question now. You'll get a chance to ask that question when you have a chance to vote on the levy for certain.
Okay, so can I get that information? I know we added, between the time Dr. Gordon left and Kiskowski started, we added 6 new full-time equivalents. I remember that. I don't know how many we've added since that point. And I know we're, like you said last time, I think we're at 1.5 million in estimated deficit. Is that correct?
Well, the way the budget was presented this year with the COVID estimated expenditures, it put us into a deficit budget of, I think 1.4 was the number.
Okay, 1.4. All right. So we've gone from a $3.5 million surplus to a $1.4 million potential deficit. Okay. How much revenue do you think we will gain from the new construction off that $12 million that we were going to get?
Based on our tax rate from last year, it was $646,000.
Oh, so that's a lot of money. Okay. I mean, that's almost half the increase in the levy on CPI.
Correct.
Well, more than half. Okay. Do we expect the new construction to continue at the pace it's going at? Do we have any estimates, or is it just roll in as it rolls in?
You know, it's hard to estimate that. I did talk to I think it was the Milton Township treasurer. He thinks it's going to obviously trend down a little bit this year. Although I think the other treasurer, or the other assessor, I should say, property assessor, said that he actually feels like the number is going to be higher because there has been a lot of construction and home remodeling going on this year. So
yeah, I know there's been a lot of real estate movement. I don't know if that translates to new construction, but
it generally does when you look at a tear down. You know, if you do a tear down, that a lot of times will come on the rolls as new property growth, depending on how they do it.
I just know on my block, you know, it seems a lot of the people who are in their late 50s, 60s, and early 70s are moving, and a lot of young folk with kids. Do we know if we're going to get an increase, or and maybe this is a question for Dr. Kiskowski, I'm not sure who, but I see a lot of people moving out from the city to Glen Ellyn with kids, you know, young kids. Is that increasing our population? And then I see Apex going up, and, you know, the other, I mean, they're 1 and 2 bedroom and studio condos or apartments, but do you see a material effect on the number of students we'll be enrolling over the next 5 years?
You know, it's a good question. I think we had been flat in enrollment for a number of years, and then we went up last year almost by 100 kids. You know, so as new families move in with younger kids and older people move out, you know, that cycle does generally cause an enrollment shift and an increase.
All right. Well, I'm could I ask for the same analysis that we asked for back in when we were doing these budgets, as to, you know, what the you know how we did those 5 and 10 and 5 and 10 year budget analysis to see where the surplus would be if we, you know, watched our spending and watched our P's and Q's, et cetera, and what impact that would have on the surplus like we did before?
Are you talking about the PMA product, the 5-year financial projection on different CPI estimates?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy.
We zeroed the levy too.
Yeah, I think we did almost like 30 estimates.
Yeah, I just would want like 0 and max.
Eric?
Maybe something in between.
Eric?
I mean,
yes.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm simply, I wanted just to point out that we can, if the board has a discussion about the kind of data that we collectively would want to have, and certainly Bruce's your idea for some scenarios is a perfectly legitimate item to put on the table, then we can ask the district to do that. I don't want at this point during this meeting have individual board members to be making different requests for how the board collectively is going to make a decision about the levy. But we will have at our next meeting, we can certainly have consideration before we get to that levy meeting about what the board wants. I don't want to at this meeting to have individual board members directing the district to bring back information. I mean, I think we've agreed not to do that.
That puts us up against a real time crunch. I remember in the past when Mrs. Clark, Stephanie Clark, was the board president, before you changed the rules, where a board member had to ask for consensus to get data and information from the administration. Since that change was made, you know, I really feel like my ability as a board as a board member to do my work has been limited. I don't generally ask for a lot You could see that through my email chains, but I think we're asking money from our customers. Our customers are the residents of Glen Ellyn. And all I hear about from many of the customers in Glen Ellyn is my taxes are high. My schools, people have different views on how the schools are doing, but they definitely have a view about where their taxes lie. And so, me having to ask for consensus on that is really an indication of how that board rule change that you made and that 6 other board members on this board voted for has affected my ability to do that. Mrs. Clark never, and the former board never limited information like that in such a form and fashion like you're doing now.
Okay, can I just jump in here? Because that just sounds silly. So I just kind of want to step in. The board doesn't act as an individual board member. And I think it's important to understand that. And I think it's also important to understand that the board doesn't direct specific employees of the district to do things. The board can make a request of its sole employee, the superintendent, to provide information, which she may filter down to Eric or she may not. But it's a board decision to ask a directive of the superintendent, not an individual board member. Nothing like that has changed. I mean, that's set forth in school code.
Jason, you are wrong.
You're right? You sure?
I need to ask.
I'll bet you $1 for donuts.
Jason, please don't interrupt me.
You just
Jason, please don't interrupt me.
Excuse me, Bruce. Look, Bruce.
Jason, you continue to interrupt me. I'm going to call whatever we called.
Bruce.
I don't even know what it's called. You're breaking the rules, Jason.
Okay,
because I have the floor.
He actually didn't interrupt. You had stopped, and he asked the comment. He did. You said he was wrong. I don't want to get into a debate, but I do believe that it is quite appropriate that the board, as a collective body, make recommendations to the district, to Dr. Keskowski, that we think is appropriate for the board, and that's we simply should not have individual board members directing employees to do this or that. But Bruce, your argument, I would recommend that you.
Again, can I respond to that?
I'm going to let you. Yes, I'm absolutely going to let you respond. But I think you have to make the case on the strength of your argument, and other board members can hear what you have to say. And nobody at this moment is dismissing the idea of what you suggested. So you're really kind of putting the cart before the horse. And I'm simply saying to you, this is not the meeting to be making that request. We can get to that at our next meeting. You can put it on as a future agenda item, perhaps to talk about the information we need, and then the board can have that discussion. And you'll get the information if the board thinks it's appropriate to get.
And if I may, I was told I was wrong. I'd just like to identify the source of my comment saying that the board, a board member has no legal authority to act as an individual, that decisions can be made only by the authority of a majority vote by a public board meeting comes from 105 ILCS 5/10-16.5.
But that has
Bruce, I'll give you the last word. Go ahead.
That has nothing to do with asking for data from the superintendent in order for an individual board member to make a decision that they would need to make. In other words, yes, decisions that come up for a vote, like are we going to, pass the COVID testing protocol with the saliva tests or not? That is something that we could vote on, but I can ask for all the information I want within reason, but I kind of have the keys to the castle there as a board member for data on that subject. That's the way it was for forever here in District 41 before you, Dr. Bruno, became the board president and changed the rules. Now it seems that there's it's questionable as to whether the lawyer, I think, has made the right decision. I mean, before made the decision a long time ago,
I'd like to make the motion that we table this discussion.
Denying access.
Way
Can
off.
I not be interrupted, please? I haven't gone 6 minutes like some board members. So let me talk.
Can you wrap it up?
Thank you.
We can move on, please.
I love how whenever I have a point that embarrasses you,
It's not embarrassing, Bruce.
No.
I'm getting interrupted again. See, there it is.
Bruce,
There it is.
I simply would like you to make your point, and then we can.
Well, I don't get interrupted. See, what I notice is, and I've noticed this throughout the election, when somebody's saying something that somebody doesn't like, they just interrupt them. They lose their train of thought, and then it's over. But let me continue without interruption, please, because I am a elected board member. The point is that, well, I guess let me go back. So, I remember back when boy, this is about 6 or 8 years ago, the lawyer decided that Mrs. Clark and Mr. Holtz could not have access to.
Bruce, I'm sorry. No, you are way out of line here. Ted
No,
has
I'm not.
No, yes, you are. You are not on the agenda, brother. You're not on the topic.
Sorry, I'm not.
Ted has a motion to table
No,
this
I can say I could talk about baseball scores for 3
No,
minutes.
you cannot, brother.
Second.
We have
Nope,
a second.
sorry.
I'm going to take.
Bob, you're just showing your true colors here.
Bruce,
You don't want me to discuss. You're interrupting me.
Bruce, you can interpret this any way you want. The board is using its process. I'm going to ask the board if they would like to shut off this conversation and move on. That you are currently.
Bob, you are silencing a board member's ability to make a point.
Bruce,
the point I was making was that,
allow the process to work, brother.
The lawyer decided then that
it's not
would not be able to do listen to the closed board meetings, and later the state overturned what the lawyer had said. So the lawyer's interpretation of this was completely wrong.
I'm going to have.
Bruce,
I'm asking you.
You just interrupt when I say something you don't like. That's what you do, Bob. It's what you do.
Bruce, it's
your MO, man. One time last summer, remember, two summers ago, you interrupted me. I never got to talk for more than 40 seconds at a time because you and Ted Estes interrupted me so much.
Bruce,
Bruce, by the way, I
Changed
didn't
the
interrupt
rules
you in
so
that
much
meeting.
that the ability of a board member to speak is limited, and I can't believe this. It is a travesty of our democracy.
I'm going to ask you to use discretion. And please stop. I'd like to cut off this. This is an inappropriate conversation. We have a motion on the table that it's out of order. It was second. I'm going to go around the room. Julie, are you in support?
I agree with the motion.
You agree with the motion?
Yes.
Jason?
Yeah. In accordance with board norm 4, that the board adheres to the topics on the agenda. Let's keep the conversation to what's on the agenda, and that's the levy process.
Thank you. Guillermo, are you in support of the motion?
Yeah, I support the motion that we stay with the agenda. And if Bruce wants to put this for topic of discussion for the next agenda, we should put it on it.
Thank you. Jess, are you in support?
Yes.
Thank you. Ted, you have raised.
Yes, I'm in support.
And I am also.
Many of these questions should have been brought up in advance of the meeting, and we are way off topic here.
Okay, I want to move on to folks who haven't had a chance.
Oh, I got to vote. Hold on. I got to say what I'm going to say about the motion, right? Thanks. Yeah, I really,
Bruce,
the motion is really here. Oh, you're
yes
interrupting
or no
me.
on the motion.
I got
That's
3
what we're
minutes
asking
right
you.
now, sir.
You can vote yes or no. I'm going to move on.
No.
Okay.
To explain his view.
I'm going to call on Jess.
Guillermo got to explain his view.
Bruce, you voted
wait a minute.
no.
There's rules for the
Voted no on the
for me.
motion. Okay,
I
we heard what you
am
had
going to
say.
explain how I'm going to vote on this motion.
You don't need to do it. You're, at the moment, you
Ted Estes
obviously
did.
do not need to do that. We have the vote.
I disagree with the motion for the following reasons.
Great. So he's voted no.
Silencing
no.
a
We
board.
weren't
Why do you
asking.
interrupt me? You let Ted speak.
Because it's a yes.
Everybody
Guillermo
just
speak?
voted yes or no, Bruce. That's all. And that's what you did. It's just on a motion.
Oh, I
this is
didn't
not-
vote yes or no yet.
You just said you voted no.
You just said
No.
I'm going to move on. Jess,
I
would you
said
please-
that. I said
would you please
that I would
respect
like to
your fellow board
explain
members?
why I am voting the way I'm going to
An
vote.
explanation is not necessary for this motion, Bruce. Please allow us to move through the agenda. At the moment, you're preventing other board members from having a voice.
There were other people that vote that.
Jess Buttermore, would you please
vote on
offer your
this? So
thoughts?
I would like my 3 minutes to speak. I get 3 minutes, I believe.
You've had plenty of, Bruce, even you said you had 6 minutes, about 3 minutes ago. Jeff.
No, that's because you interrupted me like
Bruce,
16
please.
times. I can't
Bruce.
get my voice said because you interrupt me, Bob.
Bruce, I'm going to ask you again.
It's an MO. So I would, we had this discussion 2 summers ago where you interrupted me 19 times in like less than 15 minutes.
Bruce, right now you're responsible.
I want it noted that,
probably
huh?
You're responsible for close to at least 20 minutes or more of off-topic conversation.
No, most of this
I'm going to move on.
topic except for the times when I'm getting interrupted.
Bruce, please allow the board to do.
And I'm sorry.
You'll have
Ted,
time.
I needed to explain. I needed to answer Ted's question about why I wasn't able to respond with, in a timely manner.
Bruce, you don't have to answer.
I wasn't
There's nothing
feeling
else on the
well
table.
because I'm going through chemotherapy right now. That's why I didn't get my questions in time.
Okay.
So, taking a nap.
Bruce, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we are supportive and concerned about your health, and everyone has been. And it probably was difficult to express that. It showed some courage to do it, and I appreciate that. Please allow us to move into the meeting. All right, thank you. Jess.
I think we're talking about the levy. Yeah, the levy process. So Eric, I think there's a point at which you share how tax rates are related to the levy. Is that coming up in the future? Should I just wait for it? Or do you want to take a moment to explain it now?
I can explain it now. It's a direct, the factors that impact the tax rate are twofold. It's the equalized assessed valuation of our taxing boundary. So basically all the property within the district that contributes to our tax extension. And then it's the dollar amount. So if the EAV rises, say for instance, our EAV in our community goes up 10%, which I don't expect it to happen, but if that does that, keep in mind, we're limited on the dollars we can ask for our levy. So since CPI is 2.3, we ask for all of CPI, which is a 2.3% increase, but the EAV went up, say for instance, 10% of our taxing, I guess the parcels that are available for us to extend a tax on, that would result in a lower tax rate. I can show that table too. I've shown it in the past where basically there's an inverse relationship between EAV goes up, tax rates go down, EAV goes down, tax rates go up. Kind of the relationship.
So basically, increased home values will make the rates go down.
Yeah, the tax rate would be lower in a higher home value market.
And if I'm remembering correctly, when the Financial Advisory Council, who's made up of a bunch of financial experts within our community, that was part of their rationale for recommending that we do the full levy as part of our taxing strategy, is because when we invest in our schools, that is a part of the calculus of raising the home values. Was that part of the rationale? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know if that was directly tied to that, because honestly, I don't believe the tax rate is a kind of a driving factor in our home values. It is the product of EAV. But I don't know.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I meant that home values investing in the schools is a factor on home values that makes those go up, and having home values go up is what makes our tax rates go down. Is kind of where I was headed with it.
Yeah, I know they did give an opinion to that effect.
Now the advisory council, my understanding is they feel like they've given their guidance already. It hasn't changed from when they last gave guidance on our levy process. Is that correct?
That's correct. I did reach out to the FAC chair at this point, and I'm actually scheduled to talk to him tomorrow.
Okay.
I asked to confirm that their opinions have not changed. I'll have the answer for that for the next board meeting.
Okay, so at the next board meeting, you might give like a review of what their recommendation was.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay. Just confirm. I would have more questions maybe about that, but I'll save them till the next meeting then. Thank you.
All done, Jess?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ted, I don't think we've heard from you on.
No, no questions. I appreciate the refresher. but pretty
Yes.
familiar, like Julie said.
Okay, good. And Mr. Lobach, any questions on the process?
No, I'm good, Eric, thanks.
Eric, I'm good also. Thank you. It's always good to go through it on numerous occasions. Like Julie, each time
I'd
you
like
do
to
it.
respond, Bob, to Jess.
I'm sorry, Bruce,
I'd
you're
like to
looking at,
respond to Jess.
I'm sorry, why, you want to
The second
respond to, you want to respond to Jess?
Yeah, because the second round of questioning, according to the board norms and rules.
Well, they're questions for Eric, but can you redirect the question to Eric? Jess isn't the person providing
No,
the.
just, I think when the EVA goes up, the taxes also go up, but, I speak, maybe it's just a statement. I speak with a lot of neighbors who move in Glen Ellyn for the schools and get to a certain age and, look at their home value versus the taxes they pay. And really question whether they can stay in their home or whether it's worth it to stay in their home once their kids are out of school. I mean, or out of West or wherever they go. But, this levy impacts a lot of lives. And, I know we want good schools. I know we want to finance good schools. And I work in a school where 70% of the money comes from the federal and state sources. Only 33% comes from local sources. And, the houses are very affordable. And I live in a district where I think 93%, is that right, Eric, of our money comes from local tax sources, and 7% from the state and federal government?
That sounds about right. I think local taxes are closer to 90%. Yeah.
Okay, give or take. But, we're at least 90-10 on a charitable basis. So we're asking for this money from each and every resident, whether they have kids in school or whether they're, senior citizens living on a fixed income. So I think it's important, and I think this is one of the most important decisions we make as a board. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done. Appreciate that. I think then we have moved on from the levy. Thank you, Eric. And next up is approving the Illinois Association of School Board Resolutions. As you know, Julie Hill is our delegate to this year's delegate meeting. And Julie, you have put together some recommendations based on the recommendations of the resolutions committee. So how about if I give you an opportunity to give us any update, and then I'll call for the motion.
Okay. So I attended another 2+ hour Zoom session about this, and I did get some new information, but I'm still a little unclear on the process just because it's virtual, so everything is sort of confusing. But what you have in front of you is almost exactly what you had, I guess, just a week. Is that just a week ago? With one change after some feedback from fellow board members here about e-learning on election day. So I changed that, but that should be the only change on what you see. I have like a bunch of scribbled notes for myself. So of the ones that were not recommended to be adopted, those will not automatically be on the consent agenda. They had to be appealed. And as of that meeting, numbers 2 and number 4 had been appealed. 1, 3, and 8 had not been appealed, and I'm still not sure whether or not they still have a chance. I didn't get where that deadline. I feel like that deadline is already passed. So these 1, 3, and 8 may not even come up for a vote.
Okay.
So those might not matter, but if they do, I will vote in accordance with what we vote on as a board. Okay, I said number 2 and 4. Anything that's been recommended will be on the consent agenda. So things that we disagree with, I will email the proper authorities to ask to have them removed so that they can be voted on separately. What else do I need to? think that's mostly it. I would add that resolution number 2 again had quite a spirited discussion. I would say it definitely got the most airtime. There are definitely strong feelings on either side. And I definitely gave like a heartfelt I don't know what to call it, speech in support of what we're trying to do. And I got a little choked up because like that's what I do. So, but we seem to have pretty solid support around the Chicago metro area and Champaign, and I think a couple on the Illinois side of St. Louis area. Outside of that, it was a lot of rural areas saying, well, you know, my kid has had a gun and he goes hunting, and that's of course not what it's about. It's just if your child doesn't have a FOID card, you should keep your gun locked. So I'm not trying to tell anybody whether or not they should have a gun. It's about just keeping our children safe, especially in the in light of the COVID pandemic and the tendency for suicide and all these other things associated with isolation and stress and whatever. So I think that's all I have to say, unless there are things that need to be said to me.
Well, do you want to maybe just quickly go through the resolution, not summarize them, everybody's had a chance to look at them for something, but just say what your recommendation is so it's clear.
Sure.
Because we may be able to just vote on all of these collectively with one up or down vote. So
Right.
do that.
So it should be what's in front of you, but I will go through number 1. I'm suggesting that we do not adopt it. Number 2, suggesting that we do. Number 3, with tears. Number 3, do not. Number 4, do. Number 5, do not. Am I talking too loud?
No, you're good.
Number 6, that's the one I changed.
Okay.
After the board's feedback to do adopt.
Okay.
Number 7, do not adopt, which is, I hope I fixed that for you guys. My copy's so old. And number 8 didn't make it, but if they happen to make it, do not adopt.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, is that clear to board members then? Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Then may I have a motion to approve the IASB report to the membership recommendation compiled and presented by board member Julie Hill?
Motion.
Julie, make sure you got it in there. I think we got a second. We got the second too. All right, any other discussion on this?
Yeah, just briefly, just to thank Julie for putting this all together. Even just from last meeting to today, you know, just the time that's been put in, I think is impressive. And especially just looking at numbers.
I'm sorry, it was me.
You know, I think just the comments that you've made and just the analysis that you put into this is to be appreciated and thanked.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Maybe you can bring number 2 in, right?
You know, we have support from 3 state chapters of 3 national organizations, and if we fail, that's something to be really proud of.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
I think that's pretty cool.
All right, Mrs. Moak, a roll call, please.
Yes.
Mr. Lobach,
Yes.
Mrs. Buttimer,
Yes.
Mr. Estes,
Yes.
Mr. Guzma,
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
No.
Mrs. Hill,
Yes.
Dr. Bruno.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is to approve the agreement for saliva-based COVID-19 screening. May I have a motion to approve the services agreement for COVID-19 surveillance with Safeguard Surveillance in substantially the form of the agreement presented to the board? I need a motion.
Yeah, motion.
Okay, I need a second.
Second.
Okay, discussion here on the agreement, and we've been joined by Attorney Brian Crowley. If there are additional questions that board members have before we move on the roll call. So let me just see if there are questions of folks. I'll go around the room. Ted, do you have any further questions?
So I do have a couple of questions. And not necessarily on the contract itself, but on the use of the testing.
Very good. I think
I'm
that's
hoping
appropriate,
that's
please.
appropriate now. It was a little hard to tell with the earlier topic. Just to clarify, does this testing help at all with the staff coverage?
Well, I'm going to roll it out in terms of the purpose of the testing is to identify asymptomatic spreaders and get them out of the school as quickly as possible. So ultimately, yes, the more we can keep, transmission and spread from happening in our buildings, all of that should help. Can I say there's a direct and immediate impact? No.
Okay, all right. And then the other questions I have to do with logistics. You're already shorthanded, and there's going to be a fair amount of work involved for staff in order to be able to do this, from what I understand. I mean, Dr. Campbell points out that, even just putting stickers on a 1,000 tubes, it's going to take a bunch of time, and then collecting them. Do you feel that you're going to have the staff to be able to step up to this?
Right. Part of what we'll have to design and sit back and take a look at is how much of it will be managed up here at CSO and prepped for the buildings. Is there a place for volunteers in this? And then what's the process once it hits the building? Again, the process will have to look different if we're doing on-site testing. If by chance we were on remote learning, coming back from Christmas break or that Thanksgiving break in between, the process looks different. So I've had some conversation with two of the other districts that are using this in terms of what their process looks like, and then figuring out what will work for us. I think there is no doubt in my mind that for the first 2 run-throughs, particularly during the holiday times, we may need to reach out for some level of some volunteer support to sticker some labels, but part of it will be determining through that, the pilot, exactly how long does it take to set up the sticker template and run the stickers. Not long, but the stickering is what's time consuming. So I have some ideas from the other places that are doing it of what's made their process work.
Okay.
One district is utilizing subs that don't come into the building. They come pick up things and take home and sticker, because all their stickering is barcodes, so there's no names. But again, it'll be figuring out what works for us.
Okay. All right. And then the calendar that you showed before showed trying to do the testing in 2 days. But your estimates were somewhere around 2,500 tests if we were at full speed ahead. The contract talks about how it might take up to 48 hours to get test results back if there's more than 1,000 tests in a day. So how do you resolve that?
So we did speak about what a realistic turnaround time would be if we had to do that coming off of break, and Dr. Campbell can jump in. If we tried to stagger so that we had a lighter load going to the lab for processing on that Monday and a heavier load going on Tuesday, again, Dr. Campbell in the lab would have to give us, and it depends on how many actually turn them in and test on those days. So when we talked about, could this be realistic? Yes, but we knew we had to parcel it out so that we weren't sending a heavy load on Monday.
Dr. Campbell, I don't know whether you heard Ted's question and Melissa's response, but he was pointing out that at a higher level of testing in that first week, perhaps responses would not come back to us within 24 hours, that it might take a little bit more time. And Melissa pointed out that you had requested that if you staggered the bulk of those tests on Tuesday, you felt confident you could get the result back.
I think we have to talk about how many that is, but yes.
Right, and knowing that we're probably going to start like everywhere else, lower and gradually as people see a benefit or get comfortable with it, that our participation percentages go up. So just if we look at what those numbers were today and add some ability to grow after an informational meeting, I don't think we would be, anywhere near a max.
Okay. All right,
that good?
that's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ted. All right, yes, Guillermo, any questions having to do with the contract, the testing? Again, Mr. Crowley is here.
Just had a question, just a clarification on the consent and waiver. The bottom of page 1, where it says that voluntary consent for you or your child to participate. So we're not implying here that parents are going to be submitting tests, right?
We are not.
No.
Okay.
Just students and employees.
Okay, just making sure that that's clear, because it has it both times and just the way it sounds like you or your child. So, but that was the only thing that I highlighted down. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. Julie, any questions?
I don't think it's for Brian, but I have a question for the ether, probably Dr. K. We're going to start if we pass this, we would start the 30th of November. When would the pilot be? Like,
Soon.
Like
That was
kinda
something that Dr. Campbell was going to get us the supplies to do. We'd have to order labels. So it really depends on how quickly, we weren't going to start ordering anything until we see what tonight's action is. So we would order supplies.
so ASAP probably then. Once you get all your supplies and stuff, you're not waiting for a certain date.
No, we would work with Dr. Campbell and see, if we did a 10-person pilot really to go through the process, when they would like, when their lab could handle 10. I'm sure they could handle 10 anytime.
Sounds good, thanks. That's all I have.
They're good?
Thanks.
All right. Bruce, any questions on the agreement?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Jessica, questions on the agreement?
Probably.
Probably.
Well, I have a ton of questions, but the earlier presentation kind of took me off guard, so they might have been already addressed. I guess I'm not smart enough or rested enough to understand if, based on the calendar you provided, Melissa, if we're going to reach the minimums that are outlined in the contract based on how you have that, if we're in school the whole time.
Right. Eric, is our minimum 1,500?
5, I thought.
500.
500?
I thought it was 1,500.
I thought it was 15.
It was, and I thought
The minimum in the agreement is 1,500. However, you have the ability to go down to 500 or
Correct.
up to 500 upon notice.
Jess, did you hear that?
Effectively be 1,000.
What was that, Eric?
Our minimum could effectively be 1,000. Because we go down 500 from our bottom of our range.
Oh, right, there it is.
Okay. So we are going to hit it if we stay in school. What happens if we are forced to take a pause on a wide scale? How would we use the minimum of tests that we're required to pay for? And I guess I have in my mind that the minimum is 700. The true minimum is like 750 a week, because that's half of 1,500 for the first 60 days.
Should we let Brian? Brian, can you speak to that?
If we were on a pause.
If we were on a pause, we weren't in.
Your Honor, so you have the ability to pause during it would really depend on when the payment is made. So let's say it's February, just as an example.
No, but can we talk about, because we're talking about the holidays, we're literally signing this in
Sure.
crazy storm of COVID plus seeing families twice. So
okay, fair enough. Yeah. So if you make your payment and then you realize, oh, we've got to pause, you are on the hook for a minimum of 50% of what you paid. The next month coming in, you would get a 50% credit. Okay. If you're paused for December and January, you would get a credit for that 50% in December. And then in January, you'd only be required to pay 40% of that. That was one thing we were able to negotiate because you haven't made that payment yet.
Yeah. So we'd lay out 100% and then 50% of that we could push to the next month, but we would have spent 50%.
That's right.
Like, which is 750 tests.
That's right.
If we're doing the minimum. So how would we use those tests if nobody was in session?
That would be
on site.
I think that.
But in all honesty, wouldn't we be using those testing, wouldn't the test, if we're going for remote, on a pause, something other than, the state shuts down schools, would the testing be utilized as to monitor the positivity rate within our staff and students to determine when we could come back to school?
I think that.
Right. Well, if we're on a pause, whether it's a building pause or a district pause because the governor shuts down schools, then obviously we wouldn't be testing. If we're on a pause related to the holidays, we could use the testing to determine a safe level of, do we continue to stay on a remote pause, or can we start back with our blended model? And as I said, if we're in person, we would do it the way I typically envision the testing working, which is that the kids do it at home and they bring it in with them and deposit it at school. If we're, as I said, after Thanksgiving, we would start on remote learning for those first 3 days, during which we get all this testing done and delivered to the lab. So it really depends on if we're in person at the time that we test, or if we're on a remote day and we have to set up on-site testing. But if we're in a long-term shutdown remote, a remote, then we wouldn't be testing at the time that we know we're going to be out for a certain period of time.
But we would have paid for 750 tests a week. That wouldn't get reimbursed because we only get reimbursed for 50. So I guess I'm asking the question, is there a way for us, since our community will have paid for tests, that we use in some way the tests that we have paid for, whether or not we are in school? Because otherwise, isn't that a waste?
And Brian, if I'm correct in looking at Schedule 1, under the services that, well, the estimated number of tests is 1,500. If we were to go into a long-term school closure due to a governor order, what have you, under Schedule 1, upon reasonable notice, we could reduce the number of tests to 500 and to be on the hook for the 50% of that.
That is correct. So I will, so just so you know, eyes wide open, once you have made a payment, you have paid for 50% of those tests. And if you don't do any tests under the language of the agreement, that 50% is gone. That is accurate. So I do think that going forward, it is important to be eyes wide open through this. We have 7 days before you have to make a payment right now. If you looks like you're going to be in a long-term closure, but you want this agreement to continue, then I think our estimate is a lot less tests to bring that minimum down.
And I guess I would, if we pay for one test, so what they use that, like that, we're going to be on a hook for if we agree to proceed with a contract, we will be on the hook for X minimum number of tests, whether or not we're in school. And I'd like to know that we're going to use the minimum and not just throw money away for nothing.
Well, I guess the question really is, can the district use the tests regardless of the teaching model we're in as a way to assess, the ability to either be more in person or get back to in person? It's really, Yeah,
or keeping our teachers
Yeah.
healthy, or
exactly. I
is
mean,
that
so
like as a
that's-
service, or
Yeah.
at-risk populations? We want to help
You're
make
laying
sure
all
you're
out.
monitoring. Did you
There's
go
nothing
somewhere?
stopping you. There's nothing stopping you from utilizing the tests if you have.
That's the
them.
point.
And right. The answer to your question, Board Member Buttermer, is that if you don't use it, you're out 50%.
Right.
You can certainly use it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I would want to. I guess I just want to get that out there.
Yeah.
Like, I
I
don't
get
want to pay for 50% of the tests and say, "Oh, we're not in session." You know, like,
Yeah.
I'm so sad.
Right.
I want my money's worth at all times. Okay. I so- would say we would have to. That would be situational. So yes, we could make our best effort to use it, dependent on the ability of people and personnel to pull that off. So I'm sure if it's a matter of hosting a, come pick up your testing supplies and then come drop off your testing supplies, and it's a matter of getting it to the lab.
Yeah.
I also think it's important to realize the purpose of this agreement is I'm really not my right down the floor now, but safety of students and staff, and the impact on our ability to stay in person, and if we go remote we get back to in person, and how we can keep kids safely in our buildings.
Right, depending on the circumstances, like I said, that's why I said up front, there could be times when we will need some volunteer assistance.
In some ways, it's almost an insurance policy of sorts, where if there is an event that puts a district in a position that we're unable to utilize some of the tests, we're partnering with a lab that has some upfront costs as well, and so they're fostering some reservoir supplies.
Good.
It is important to keep that in consideration.
So I think it's still my turn, Jason.
It is, and that's why I said I didn't have the floor, so and that's why I said that. So I apologize. Yes.
That's all right. That's fine. So I guess we're talking a lot about the first 60 days. We have some planned breaks in there with the winter break, and that's accounted for in there. But what's not clear to me is if those days where we're already planning not to test is inclusive of the 60 days, or is it 60 days plus that break?
No, so if you approve tonight and Safeguard signs tomorrow, the agreement, the 60-day period is from November 10th to 60 days from November 10th, which includes the winter holiday. And the winter holiday is not contemplated. It states specifically that you will be doing no tests during the winter holiday.
Right. So we're not subject to the monthly minimum. It's more the weekly minimum.
Correct. And the minimum is weekly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. My next question is about the consent. It's super legal in its language, and it's not super motivational in its language. And so I don't know what wiggle room there is to add some language about the benefits of the program and the impact of participation levels on efficacy, so that there's that, and maybe it's a different page, and one's marketing and one is the consent. But as it reads now, it's like, I don't care either way. Like, it's just this legal paperwork, and there's no big deal if I say yes or no. But it is kind of a big deal because we're kind of spending a lot of money to keep people safe, and it's safer if a high percentage of people participate. So I kind of want that communicated very clearly somewhere. So Brian, is it possible to communicate that in the consent?
Not in
form
that.
somewhere?
Yeah, so the consent, if it's the board's will to follow that path, we can certainly add to that. If I would defer though to administration if they feel there's going to be a separate communication that's going to address that anyways. So that the consent is our consent, and so we can change that. That's not going to be subject to significant negotiations with Safeguard. But I think the legalese is necessary. But as far as the language to get more people involved and more hopeful language, if you will, we could put that in a separate communication. Perhaps that makes sense if you already have that, but if you want it in there, we certainly can put that in there.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
I would see that coming in the communication and kind of campaign to get people to participate.
Right. And maybe consider adding one line or two to, I guess sometimes a lot of people don't read anything, anywhere, anytime. But the thing that they're going to sign, sometimes that's the thing they're more likely to read. So,
I mean, merely
just keep that in mind.
anecdotally, we've had a few districts that have signed off on this, and I have not heard of any pushback from families and parents. That doesn't mean that won't come, but it's been fine thus far.
Okay. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess. And Jason.
Okay. I got a couple of questions for Brian, then I have a couple of questions for Dr. Campbell. So I'm not sure how you want to handle those. If we're, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, well, why don't we, Brian's on a roll. Why don't we go with
Okay,
Brian?
sounds good. The term of the agreement looks like it runs through June 4th, and I may have missed it. Is there an option to extend the term of the agreement if we wanted to roll that out to any summer programs?
The agreement does not contemplate that. I mean, I'm sure they'd be open to it, but does not contemplate an extension beyond that.
Okay. Because that's something we may want to consider, because it would be nice to know that option were available, and even going into the 21-22 school year, at least to know that we may have an option if that was there. And then another question is that, and I know this was kind of alluded to, but the intent of the agreements to test students and staff of the district, but we could also use a test for district vendors such as bus drivers if the district wanted to, and there was agreements with those vendors, correct?
Yes, but we certainly would need to get agreements with and consents from those vendors. Yeah.
Right, and that's a separate issue outside of this contract. But I mean, under the terms of this contract, that would be okay.
This is an agreement for tests. Who you want to obtain those tests is up to us.
Okay. Those are my questions for Brian, and I have some other ones for Dr. Campbell that I can get into down the road.
Why don't we do it?
It doesn't matter to me.
That was very quick. I don't think there's a problem. Maybe we will be closed after this one session. But Dr. Campbell, Jason Lobach has a question or two for you, if you don't mind.
I have a few. In looking at the metrics to keep our schools open, what I'm looking at is the safety of our students, and staff, the quality of teaching and learning, so the ability of our staff to provide education and learning opportunities for our kids, and the ability and the environment for our kids to learn, staff availability, and the mental health of our students and staff. Can you just address how this testing program would impact each of those metrics?
I have to say I've been in lab for a while. I'm going to start backwards. I think for mental health, it's very helpful, especially for the teachers, right? The teachers are the ones that have to go in there and have a lot of concern. And I can tell you that so far the districts that we've rolled it out, they're overwhelmingly positive, right? I think there's more wiggle room or ambiguity when it comes to, how to remain open or to make those decisions. There's a lot of factors that are outside of our control, right? So if you're at the level of community spread that we were at last week, or maybe now, I think this is probably when it's the most effective, right? We had 15 positives in my school district last week, including the sleepover. Now, there will be a point where I don't think this could work, right? If there's a level of community spread, this is an effective tool, but it's not invincible, right? So I think everyone needs to be thoughtful about how they use a tool like this to move forward. But also at the same time, I've talked to epidemiologists, including a former head of the Illinois Department of Public Health, the medical officer there, who our district is consulting with. And her feeling is that if you have a shutdown, the last thing that's going to do is actually reduce spread, because then children will be unregulated and that you'll likely have more community spread if you shut down the schools. So I don't think there's a simple answer to those parts of the questions you asked. And there might have been another one at the very beginning, and if you repeat it, I'd be happy to answer it.
It was safety, which I think you were getting into as to your last part as to your uncontrolled environment.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there, everyone is talking about how a school is generally low risk, right? And I don't disagree with that, but I think the more you stack risk in a school environment, eventually you're going to have transmission, right? Because if you think of each event where you have an individual who might be infected or infectious in the school environment, maybe the odds of that person giving transmitting the virus is 1 to 100. Well, then when you have 100 people or 200 people, and probably 1 to 100 is generous, right? A study I read said about 87% of the time there's no transmission when an infected person goes to school. Well, that means that 13% of the time maybe there is. So I think it's really just, again, it's math and numbers, like everything else about this virus, right? And I think the answer to that will very much depend on the positivity rate.
So if we're looking at an 80%, like 87%, like you said, 13% that are of positive cases that are transferred in schools, that's what we're looking to prevent with this screening, is to identify that 13% to stop that spread.
All right. Well, I don't know if you'll know which one of those, 13% would have caused it, although, it's probably the very, very infectious people that have very high viral loads that will easily pick up. But there's a stochastic nature to a weekly surveillance, right? Did they go to school did they become very infectious on a Friday and we sampled them on Monday, or vice versa? There's an element of, there's an uncontrollable element to that equation.
Okay, so moving to the other side of testing. So we've done a lot of talking about the test itself and positivity rates and what have you. I'd like to talk to the other side of the testing as to the information that will be coming back to the district from Safeguard. And what kind of format will that information be coming back to the district in? And how can the district then utilize that information in making decisions regarding staying in school, coming back into school? And this is a more formatted what have you.
Right. Well, I think what we're going to provide is spreadsheet level data of all the barcodes we run, and we'll let you know who has a finding of potential clinical significance.
Okay.
Now, again, how to use that data, I think that's complicated, and every board has to work it out themselves and consult experts. I think there's enough experts that would have such widely varying opinions in this epidemiology world that I wouldn't choose one side or the other. I know what I know, and it's virology.
Right. And in all honesty, I'm not more as concerned about the latter part, but more the first part of your answer there is that you'll be giving us information in a quantifiable, identifiable fashion to identify clusters. And we can use that information to create whatever kind of target
yes,
absolutely.
absolutely. Every time I call a number into my district nurse, right? She won't tell me who it is, but I'll be like, is it related to another case? Is it a standalone? And so far the answer's been no, aside from that brief moment where we thought they were all related and then there was a sleepover.
And
Right?
so that kind of, and that's the kind of, like the information that we're going to get back from Safeguard, we'll be able to use in that sort of a fashion.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. And that's the same regardless whether the district's in person or if we had to go on adaptive pause or if we had to go remote. This testing, this screening, this surveillance procedure can be utilized to determine whether or not the district needs to go remote, but how to come back from remote and if that can be done safely. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Right. No, that's what I'm arguing, if anyone that has to pause, or like if we have a grade level in our district that's paused, we want to surveil them before they come back. Absolutely.
Okay.
Don't go away yet, Dr.
Yeah, no,
Campbell.
I just go through my notes here, and I think that's what I have. I think that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just give board members one last opportunity, perhaps some things that they've heard Dr. Campbell say or other questions from their colleagues that they want to raise. Ted, anything that has come to you?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let me get back online here. Bruce, any additional questions either for Dr. Campbell or Mr. Crowley or Dr. Kaskowski?
No.
Thank you very much. Julie,
No, I'm good. Thank you.
you're good. Guillermo?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Jess?
I feel like I should have more questions, but I don't.
You should.
I'm sure I'll think of them tomorrow.
Okay. And Mr. Lobot?
I think I'm good for now, yeah.
Okay. I do not have any additional questions. I do appreciate the board's thoroughness. I do appreciate Brian being on the call and Dr. Campbell's willingness to answer questions. And board, before or as we move into roll call, as we have done with other past votes, particularly votes of significance, if you want to take up to 3 minutes to explain your vote, either yes or no, you of course should take advantage of doing that.
I would have another question for Eric before we go to a vote.
All right, well
Would
then,
it be for Ed or
then let's take the time. Eric, can you jump on? Jason has a question that's occurred to him.
So I just want to identify, just looking at this, and now I've lost my place in schedule, but I think it was just under a $400,000 outlay is what we were looking at this, correct?
Well, that depends on the duration. We didn't
Correct.
really talk about how long we would be doing this.
Okay.
And that's going to be the biggest factor to consider in the total cost is the duration.
My question is, what's going to be the impact on, obviously it's going to affect our budget in a negative manner. What effect will this increased spending have on the district's ability to continue to operate in a normal fashion and its operating expenses, what have you?
Well, what I would say is, this is not a budgeted expense. The board approves this and we move forward with it. This will be something that will trigger absolutely the need to amend our budget by the end of the fiscal year to include it. So it's not going to have an adverse effect on operations. We have enough money in our fund reserves to fund this and pay for it, obviously. So this will just be basically almost like a housekeeping step to amend our budget to include this dollar amount in there prior to the end of the fiscal year.
So there are sufficient reserves to cover this. Obviously, we have reserves in place for a variety of reasons. We obviously have to build those reserves back up for reserves that are earmarked for specific purposes, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
But we'd be using reserves for this, and the district's within its financial ability to do that.
Yeah, our fund reserve balance is just shy of 30 million, so this is certainly going to fall under that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good. Oh, okay. So Jess, you did think of a question.
Yeah, I guess I'm still struggling with the presentation, Melissa, that you gave at the beginning, with the schedule and the concerns and option 1 and option 2.
Mm-hmm.
That we're sort of being asked to vote on this independent of that information. And I guess I don't understand how I can vote to support surveillance testing when I feel like whether or not we're going to be in school is so precarious, because we're going to be on the hook for tests. And so I guess help me understand how we're supposed to make this decision with that unknown. That's the part that was making my head.
I don't want to say that it's an easy answer, but if we're in session, and really what it changes is how we'll conduct the testing. So if we're in person, then the testing will be done at home and samples will be brought in. If we are on remote, You know, or as I said, like coming off of Thanksgiving, we would intentionally have 3 remote days to conduct the testing and surveil everyone before bringing them back into the schools. This was intentionally set up that way after talking with Dr. Campbell of, you know, that's the goal, to surveil people before you bring them back into the building. So, you know, do we want to use this as a tool to do that? You know, is the question.
And if I could piggyback.
Jess, would you mind, before you respond, Jason wanted to.
And I understand where you're coming from completely, and I'm not trying to downplay it, because I see those numbers that were in that, and it scares the crap out of me. It does, but I think that's the point of what this testing this surveillance could give us, is a better understanding of what that wider range of numbers means to us as a district. Because right now we're looking at countywide data that isn't broken down by necessarily our individual staff and students. And that's difficult to process as to how do we utilize that data. So this is going to give us a much more specific data point upon which to make decisions. And so to me, it just, the fact that we have those couple of different options, I look at it as a reason why this sort of surveillance screening is of importance.
Right. Well, and I think if you think of it as, you know, some places have already made a decision that the holidays, you know, with the transmission rates and all of the data, where it is now and where it's projected to be, some people have already decided we're going to stay out and we're not going to try to come back in that time period between the 2 holidays. But all districts are not contemplating rolling out a testing plan. So after talking about how this could be used, the option is really you make no attempt to open during that period of time because you believe it's just too risky. You make an attempt to open during that time without having the level of information that surveillance will give you, or you make an attempt to open during that time after you've done the surveillance and you see what your data shows you and make a decision from there.
Yeah, I guess what I'm struggling with and is in part that this is so complicated. It looks like we've created the most complicated scenario we could possibly create, and then we have to layer testing on top of it, which is an added expense. And I guess, are there opportunities? I feel like there's an opportunity there to simplify and bring in testing later, after this holiday session. And so I guess, because in part that just simplifies so many things, and it could reduce the time that we're spent testing. And right now we're being asked, okay, either you do testing or you don't do testing. And there's not like a wiggle room in there for to say, well, yeah, we want to do testing, but rather do it in a simpler time. And we can see the writing on the wall that the case count is going to go 100 past week or whatever. The insane chart that Katie showed us with the climbing the mountaintop. So I guess I struggle to make this decision in that kind of framing of it. And are there other options here for us, or is it really simply a matter of yes, testing no matter the case right now, or no testing no matter the case ever? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that's struggling with that. This just seems like a really complicated decision to make with all these factors, and the only variable that we have on the table is whether or not we do testing. Right. But there's so many other variables on the table that are concerning.
Well, I think the nature of the agreement means we would have to give a start date, because then we make a payment. So that's just by virtue of the agreement. I think the choices for how to navigate the holiday period coming up with transmission rates being what they are is, there's really three decisions on the table. One, you don't try and do any level of in-person instruction because the numbers are so high. Two, you try to do some level of in-person instruction between the holidays with no surveillance data behind it. Or three, you try to open once you've done your surveillance and use that data to tell you whether you can make that attempt or whether you shouldn't. So, it's just a matter of when do you want to start and, how important is that time in between the two breaks to you? Will it be simple to pull off in that time frame? Absolutely not. But in some ways it's also, this is exactly what this testing can allow you to do. If you're willing to put in the work and move mountains, because on some days it's probably going to feel like that's what it takes to get this done. So, it's really comes down to the commitment to make something happen, because we may have a tool to do that, or we wait until after the holiday is over. But, as I said, if we start after the holiday, after winter break, then really the choice is, do we not attempt to have any in-person instruction happening during those weeks? Or do we open and basically fly blind for those couple of weeks?
Are those even choices that we're talking about now? They're not. They're not. The only choice we have is to say test or not test.
So just if I could, I'm sorry, Julie, maybe you want to?
I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I don't know, Jess, I don't know if this is your question or if this is the question that comes from me after hearing you ask your question. But if we have to go remote for any period of time in the next 60 plus days, would we continue, assuming we can move these mountains and get the staff there or volunteers to do whatever people need to get done to continue testing, would we continue testing even a full remote situation just to monitor, to inform our decision when to come back?
I hope so.
That
is an option for that is a possible option. The district could recommend doing that. Again, how we use the testing, right? When we use the testing is up to us. It isn't necessarily tied to
if
one.
we've paid for it, right? And I think that's what Jess.
And she's right.
I don't want to speak for you, Jess. Sorry.
No, there is.
But that's about paying for it.
Right.
Well,
so
there's
we paid for it. So, like she says, we want to make sure we use it. So if we're remote for some period of time, whether it's 2 weeks or a month or whatever, would we plan to continue to test to surveil that and inform our decision of when and if we can come back? Assuming all those mountains are movable, of course. Is that what you guys have in mind, or would you stop testing? I'll stop talking.
I think it depends on the situation. If we're in a government shutdown and we know it's going to be a lengthier period of a shutdown, there would be no point in testing until when we're getting closer to opening back up. So
I guess barring the shutdown.
So if we're in an adaptive pause
yeah.
for a week. Or
yeah,
2 weeks.
then absolutely.
Okay.
Did somebody's hand go up?
Yeah, it was Guillermo.
Oh, Guillermo, go ahead, jump in there.
Yeah, and this all relates to the question that I had earlier as to how do we come back from a shutdown, because it relates to that, I think. So you have your rules of 14 days, but, you take that as a rule, at least it's another safety measure that we have that will allow us to, the goal obviously is to keep our kids and we'll keep the kids as safe as possible and keep the schools open as long as we can. And just having that testing and that additional security, I think, will help us accomplish that goal, I think. So in addition to the 14 days and some of the other things that we need to put into place to come back from those situations.
Thank you.
That's what I think.
Guillermo has actually offered his rationale for his level of support. And again, to board members, when we move to roll call, each of you will have up to 3 minutes to offer your explanation for either a yes or a no vote, just as a reminder. Jess, are we good? Can we move on?
We can move on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, good discussion. And Mrs. Moak, you can call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Curry,
No.
Mr. Guzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Estes,
Yes.
Mrs. Buttermer,
I'm in support of testing. I wish we were delaying and that our start date was in January and keeping it simple and reducing the level of uncertainty that everybody has around this and anxiety around all of the data that's out there. So I'm voting yes with reservations.
Thank you.
Mr. Olbach,
Voting yes, and I can kind of give my
Please.
rationales why. Got the call. And looking at what's important to our students and staff, first off, it's the safety of our students and staff is the number one important. And identifying risk factors that are going to jeopardize the health and safety of our students and staff has to be of number one importance. And obviously, an effective screening method for the COVID-19 virus is something that's going to help protect the safety of our staff and students. Another factor to consider is how it's going to impact the quality of teaching and learning. Having staff and students available to come to school, whether it's to teach or whether it's to learn in a healthy, safe environment, whether that be remotely or whether that be in person. So as well, our remote students maybe staying home to do their learning, we still have our staff at the other end of that learning platform that need to be in a healthy, safe, healthy work environment to present and do that remote learning. So having this screening surveillance procedures in place can just only help improve the quality of our teaching and learning for our students and for our staff. To the staffing issues that have been addressed earlier, being able to identify positive probable possible cases, isolate those cases, as Dr. Campbell has said, another district utilizing this has reduced the positive cases, and we're in District 102 down to 15 cases this week. So obviously that's going to have a positive impact on our staff availability. The mental health of our staff and students is also very important. Having both parents, students, staff know that the district is committed to providing a safe place for people to work and people to learn is important. Letting people know that they can have confidence that they're going to be able to go to school, go to work, whether it be in person or remotely on a given day, is important to people's mental health. And this is something that's going to allow that process of confidence to continue. I think it's also important that this is a tool that we can use, that we're not just operating blindly, that we have we can gain much more personal identifiable information to the district. As Ellen and Katie stated earlier, as of today, we had 312 new cases per 100,000 in DuPage County, and that's great. But being able to isolate that information down to a D41 level is also very important. And I just want to close by saying this decision is a hard decision. But that's also why we're here, and that's also why we've been elected is to make these decisions, and making these decisions with the frame of mind of what's best for the safety, health, and welfare of our staff and students is important. So yes.
Thank you. Well, you got it there. 3 seconds to go.
Dr. Bruno,
I'm strongly supportive of the motion, and I'd like to just offer a brief explanation as to why. After a prolonged period of study, I find the reasons for conducting high frequency COVID-19 surveillance testing in our schools to be substantial and persuasive. Medical experts have come before the board and repeatedly presented a science-based argument for the efficiency, the efficacy of testing in our schools. Our due diligence on the science of surveillance testing has been patient, thorough, and rigorous. I've reached this point of understanding knowing that testing is a critical part of a multi-layered approach to combating the spread of the virus in our community and schools. Identifying asymptomatic cases will provide the district with vital information as it makes decisions about whether it can maintain some level of in-person learning. As a district, we need to be ever mindful of the safety and well-being of the people who we are obligated to watch over. Many of our dedicated teachers and staff are applying the craft in our buildings. We've asked our office support, paraprofessionals, and teachers to be there because we share with them the consensus view of the classroom that it is the preferred model of learning. But to do their work effectively, we need to provide them with as many layers of protection available to us. I'm fully committed to helping the district use surveillance testing as a tool that allows our staff to do the meaningful work that inspires them every morning to raise the great hope within each child. Along with the staff, the health concerns of our children are foremost in the hearts and minds of the district and board. While infectious and transmission rates are lower for the age range of most of our student population, it is not zero, nor is it without serious risk. Wearing face masks faithfully, keeping 6-foot distance, smaller class sizes, proper hygiene practices, providing PPE, deep classroom cleaning, improved ventilation, no lunchroom congregating, assigned bus seatings, learning within the hybrid model, and now surveillance testing represents the district's full throttle commitment to keep students safe and learning when in school. But as we have acknowledged this evening, despite our best efforts and willingness to invest resources, at times it will be logistically impossible to keep schools open when increased positive cases trigger large-scale quarantine. As part of the plan, then return, surveillance testing will be a new and potentially valuable tool to determine whether in-person learning can be sustained throughout the school year. Let me say finally a brief point about our plan to do the testing voluntarily. While the district has been legally advised that it has the authority to require testing as a condition for in-person learning, I agree with the initial effort to partner in good faith with our families to willingly participate. We believe that parents have no higher priority for their children than to keep schools open. The ability to do so will require the district to apply every health mitigation measure available. It will also depend on a high percentage of parents agreeing to consistently abide by the social mitigation efforts and regularly self-administer a simple, at-home, non-invasive saliva test. I'm confident that our parents will cooperate fully, and I'm willing to invest considerable personal time and effort to help the district demonstrate the importance of testing to the community, including, if necessary, demonstrating on camera how to provide a sample. I vote yes on the motion. Thank you very much. All right, we've got announcements for upcoming meetings. Monday, November 23rd.
Dr. Bruno?
Wait, there's one more.
Yeah, we still have the SME MOU.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're
Excuse me,
right.
the
I wrote on your script, Mrs. Moak, and I wrote too much on it. I'm sorry. Yes. We do have one last item. I'm sorry. To approve the memorandum of understanding with the Glen Ellyn Education Association for live stream instruction. May I have a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between the Board of Education and the Glen Ellyn Education Association, IEA-NEA, the association, agree as follows with respect to modifications of the 2020-2022 Teachers Agreement regarding teachers live streaming lessons for remote students and teachers on quarantine live stream into the classroom. That's a mouthful. I need a motion.
Motion.
Do we get a second?
I guess.
We got a second. Any discussion? All right, Mrs. Moak, now roll call, please.
Mr. Guzman?
Yes.
Mr. Curry?
Yes.
Mrs. Buttimer?
Yeah, I think it's actually a great development, and I hope that there's lots of lessons learned and shared, and perhaps professional development for maybe doing this in more widespread basis and as the need might arise. So yes.
Mr. Lobach?
Yes.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Estes?
Yes.
Dr. Bruno?
Yes, thank you. All right, now to those upcoming meetings that I so quickly got to. Monday, November 23rd, a regular board meeting. Monday, December 14th, public hearing and regular board meeting. Now, are there any items board members wish to present for consideration to a future agenda?
I have one. As I don't remember who raised it, whether it was Melissa or someone else. I know that I've talked about, about reaching out to see about testing our bus drivers. I think it also came up as part of our process of evaluating the spread of COVID in our district, looking at how kids are acting on buses, whether kids are leading it and whatnot. It just kind of emphasizes that buses are a place where we can see spread. And so I'd be interested in the district reaching out to our busing vendors to see
asking questions,
if they would be interested in partnering with the district as a part of this testing program to have the drivers that are driving for the district to participate in this testing.
Before, just seeing whether board members are comfortable with that. Eric, I'm just curious, do you know whether the company does any required testing, given that they're going to engage with students?
I don't believe that they are. I do know that those drivers are part of a union. And, in my discussions with Brian, who he's checked off now the call, but I think it might be a quite a bit of a hurdle to get an agreement in place. It almost would seem that First Student would need to have their own agreement with Safeguard, just because of the challenges with the union and some of the logistics there. That was at least the gist of the conversation when we did talk about this. But I mean, we could ask, certainly. I'm fearful that it could be pretty messy.
Yeah, and that's something I don't know, and that's why I asked the question.
Yep.
Was there somebody else who put Jess?
I'd like to discuss the format of our meetings during this time. I feel like we've seen a huge drop off in public participation as a result of the fact that we've gone back in person. And I see that as a negative thing. I think we had a lot of participation when people were able to participate remotely. So I don't know if that changes the format of how we meet or what it is, but I'd like to discuss that as a board. And then
Just before you get to your second point, I'm not sure it's even subject to discussion, because my understanding that the tier 2 mitigation, but I could be wrong, that the governor issued reduced congregants meetings. Now schools were excluded, but our board meeting would not be exempted. Reduced it to 10, which means I believe that we are going to have to go to full remote meetings as long as we're in tier 2. I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding of the effect of his announcement. So it looks like we're going to be full remote.
Right. My guess is we'll start to see information put out by the different law firms clarifying what tier 2, the implications of tier 2. That's my understanding too, but I know they'll put out information regarding OMA and line that up with tier 2 mitigation.
But assuming that isn't the case, is the board interested then in discussion about the format? Yes. I'm not seeing anybody disagreeing. Bruce, you're okay? Ted, you're okay? Yeah, either way. Okay. Guillermo? All right. Jess, did you have a second item?
No.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss what we review at each meeting in terms of COVID. And I think when we have this workshop meeting, we get a really full picture of the metrics and our district dashboard and everything, and it's awesome. I just feel like in the in-between meetings that we're not getting an update, or maybe I'm just misremembering, but I want to discuss how we're addressing those at every meeting.
So just to restate so I'm clear, you're asking the board to consider that as an agenda item on an ongoing basis, whether it's a regular workshop meeting or just a regular business meeting, that there be a COVID data review?
Yeah, not as comprehensive as what the Pratt does on their workshop meeting, but I guess it had been my understanding we were going to visit the metrics every meeting, and I think we have not been doing that. So, but
You know what, we've just for the sake of time, that's been going out in District Digest every week. Just because we've tended to have such long agendas and discussion items. So that is sent out every week. It's just not covered at every board meeting.
Okay, well, let me see. Would the board object to a discussion about COVID data metrics, maybe in an abbreviated, I'm looking at Katie back there, in an abbreviated fashion as part of ongoing meetings? We're talking about whether
What was the question? I'm sorry, I was getting plugged in.
I saw you were
Question.
getting fixed over their technology. Whether or not for a future agenda item, we could discuss having a abbreviated COVID metric update as part of all, okay, thumbs up, Jason?
Yes.
Okay, so
That's
Ted, any
fine.
objection to that conversation? Bruce, any objection to that conversation? None what's, okay, Guillermo? Okay, all right, very good.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jess. All right. Anything else?
Do I have to ask to get the data from 0 to the 2.3% increase in the levy?
So Bruce, can you state again, there were two scenarios you'd like to, is that what you
Yeah.
were? Yeah, can you state them again so I'm writing them down?
So they were the scenarios that we had. I mean, we had like 15 or 20 before. I just want
Go ahead.
budget outlook for a 5-year projected at, Eric's projected CPI would be for a 0% levy and a full levy.
Okay, thank you.
Much the same as what we did 2 and 3 years ago when we lowered taxes in Glen Ellyn.
Thank you, Bruce. Board, is the board open to this conversation about data request in lieu of the discussion on, or in anticipation of the discussion and vote on the levy, possibly seeing two scenarios? Again, we're not deciding that. We're saying put it on the agenda to discuss at the next meeting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think
Good.
it's perfectly appropriate. We don't need to
Good.
get off agenda at meetings, but this request is perfectly appropriate.
I think it's a perfectly legit request, and I appreciate Bruce making it appropriately. Thank you. Ted, you're good. Jess, yes? Yep, she's good. Guillermo, you good? All right, we're good. All right, we're good. The board does not have a reason for closed session, so we can then move. I need a motion to adjourn the November 9th, 2020 regular workshop meeting.
Motion.
Okay.
I think I heard a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Board members, thank you for a long, involved, but important board meeting. Thank you all. Have a good evening, and thank you to all the staff who stayed with us.